so. That's pretty flexible, Madam Speaker, right? If you want flexible, say we're gonna say you can't use this data in a certain way unless you have a reason to do so. I would submit to you, Madam Speaker, that most people who do things think they have a legitimate reason for them. Others might not think they have a legitimate reason, but to say you can use people's data, there's an exception if there's a legitimate reason why you want to do it. I would say there likely could be no broader conceivable exception than that one. But there are more exceptions, even if that one weren't enough. The legislation, for instance, in section 15.5 refers to implied consent. So apparently, in the case of privacy legislation, consent is not so sacrosanct because companies can interpret an implied consent in this context. So Madam Speaker, there are clear problems with this legislation in terms of the particulars, but I think we can understand broader than the particulars the motivation or the value set which is behind this bill, which is that the government is once again trying to defend corporate interests instead of defending privacy and a genuinely competitive free market. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, and it's disappointing listening to the Conservative now after Conservative stand and say, well, we don't like this, we don't like this. And then now this member made reference to some sort of a Conservative policy platform that might actually be there. We don't know, really, because we often question the lack of any sort of plan coming from the Conservative Party. What we know for fact, Madam Speaker, is that we have substantial legislation that does set the framework, that does protect the privacy of Canadians, that does enable penalties and fines to ensure that there's a consequence when a company breaks its trust with Canadians. That we know. And what do the Conservative Party say? We don't care about this type of legislation because we have our own ideas. My question to the member is, will the member and the Conservative Party not acknowledge that it still is okay to allow the legislation to go to committee where the member can continue to rant on the different ideas, maybe even do something positive, suggest an amendment that he feels would actually make the legislation better?
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, it is quite a thing to be accused of ranting by the member from Winnipeg North, and I am so sorry to have disappointed him by my speech. I recall in an earlier exchange he referred to me as a mischievous little fellow, and I framed that and I put it on my wall that the member for Winnipeg North thinks I'm a mischievous little fellow. That is truly having arrived. That was the goal I set out to have been thus recognized by that member from the beginning. But he asks what changes I would like to the bill. I suggest that he support changes that reflect what Conservative members have in their wisdom put forward through our policy declaration, which we as a caucus are strongly supporting, which is the idea that there is a right to privacy, a right to digital privacy, and that right comes before the corporate friends of that member and this government.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Honourable colleague for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, thanks as ever for an entertaining speech. I'm looking at C27 and wondering what we make of the fact, and I know he commented on this, we've got 3 different bills, they're all put together, and only one is really new, because we've seen the privacy pieces, the repealing of PIPEDA in the former Parliament's Bill C11, and this act relating to artificial intelligence and high impact AI and regulating that is essentially an entirely different scheme of legislation. Would the Conservatives agree that they should be split so we can examine them separately? I think that's already their position. I'd like to hear what the Honourable Member says to that.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Some members will recall way back in 2015, 8 long years ago, in the lead up to that election, the Liberal platform spoke about no more omnibus bills. They were going to end omnibus bills, Madam Speaker, and that went the way of the dodo.
Forget Cambodia, holiday in Canada.
Other election
Trudeau.
It was such a sunny time in the rhetoric of the Liberal caucus, and we see this government in terms of their management of their legislative calendar, right? So they put forward bills, then they prorogue Parliament, then they put forward bills again, then they call an early election, then they're putting forward bills again. On the other hand, my constituents are certainly hoping for an opportunity to weigh in on this government at some point soon. But I think the member's point is quite correct that we've seen immense hypocrisy from this government around omnibus bills, and I wonder if we're getting to a point where they'll just try to put all aspects of their legislative agenda all together at once. I think that's probably the direction some of the members want to go.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for that. And I guess to respond to the member across the way, he just says, and the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister says, just trust us on this, the member from Alberta. And I guess I would ask the member who just spoke, should we trust this government and this Prime Minister?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My short answer would be no. We shouldn't trust this government. My slightly longer answer would be, look, over the last few years in terms of all of the actions of this government when it comes to people's privacy, and we've seen various actions through COVID and various other actions contemplated, there is a great deal of concern about privacy. There is a great deal of concern about, anytime the government says, don't worry, we're going to protect your information, don't worry, we won't use these systems in this way. Because of the way this government has acted in the past, there is a great deal of concern and distrust. It is this government that has undermined trust in government and institutions because they have not been worthy of that trust.
Hear, hear. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Scarborough North.
Madam Speaker, today members of the Canadian Food Grains Bank are in Ottawa to mark the organization's 40-year mission to end world hunger. Since 1983, they have provided over $1 billion in food-related assistance, working with over 100 international partners in over 70 countries across the globe. A partnership of 15 Canadian churches and church-based organizations, Food Grains responds to emergency food needs arising from conflict, climate change, and other causes of humanitarian crises, while supporting long-term development. Their work is centered around sustainable farming practices, promoting gender equality and enabling communities to enhance their livelihoods and resiliency. Congratulations to Executive Director Andy Harrington, the Board of Directors, staff, volunteers, and member agencies that have contributed to Food Grains' incredible impact over the last 4 decades. May they continue to stay the course and help drive meaningful change. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
After over 2 years of uncertainty and lockdown, small businesses are only starting to get back on their feet. A small business in my riding received support through the Canada Emergency Business Account. As an entertainment company that took one of the hardest hits from the lockdown, they originally qualified for the loan and depended on it. CEPA kept their lights on. But now this business owner is shocked by the Liberals' claim that he, along with 50,000 others, were not eligible for the loan in the first place and are required to pay it back immediately and in full. With no recourse to appeal the decision, a simple error made on the application may now result in the complete loss of his business, and he's terrified. The hypocrisy is astounding. While Liberals shake down hardworking business owners for $2 billion over clerical errors, they have no problem shelling out $15 billion to high-priced consultants and friends who are wealthy enough to pay their own bonuses to executives. Once again, this government flaunts its inability to manage Canadians' hard-earned tax dollars while abusing its power, intentionally choosing winners and losers.
The Honourable Member for St. Laurent.
Madam Speaker, tomorrow, March 8th, is International Women's Day, a day to honor women of the past and present, a day to celebrate the achievements of women who came before us and fought so hard to get us to where we are today. And while we've come so far, there is still very much for us to do to help future generations of women to live in a fairer world. Whether we're talking underrepresentation right here in the House of Commons, the mega health research gap between men and women, femicides and gender-based violence, women still face barriers and obstacles that make it impossible to say that we live in an equitable society. Cette année, la thème de la Journée internationale.
This year, the theme of International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. Don't just say it. Think it. Be it. Do it. Value it. Truly embrace it. We can all challenge gender stereotypes, call out discrimination, draw attention to bias, and seek out inclusion in all spheres. Forging gender equity isn't limited to women solely fighting the good fight. Allies are incredibly important for the social, economic, cultural, and political advancement of women. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Madam Speaker, the City of Blainville has applied to host the Quebec Winter Games 2026. Mayor Liza Poulin, who is the first female mayor of Blainville, brought the community together behind this candidacy. She brought on board Mathieu Poirier, the owner of Jardin Dion, a pillar of the community, as chair of the committee. She can also count on a trio of high-level spokespeople, sportscaster Yannick Bouchard, athlete Myriam Boulot, and former goalie Jean-Sébastien Giguère. Therefore, I would like to join my voice with theirs by supporting the candidacy of Blainville. It has everything to host the Quebec Games 2026. Go Blainville, go!
I just want to remind members who are coming in to please keep the noise down. We're starting to get quite a bit of a hum, and members are doing their statements right now. The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Madam Speaker, it's the month of March, and that can only mean one thing. It's Irish Heritage Month. On March 10th, 2021, this House unanimously adopted Motion 18. As we celebrate the contribution the Irish have made to building our country, I encourage Canadians in every city and town to take a look in their own community to see that Irish fingerprints are everywhere. From contributing to our culture to building the foundations of our educational, religious, and government institutions, the contributions are many. Look no further than the Rideau Canal, or consider that 3 governors general came from Ireland. Stay tuned for Irish Ambassador Eamon McKee's 50 Irish Lives initiatives to learn more. Madam Speaker, over 14% of Canadians claim Irish ancestry, including myself, and I'm very proud of that. The bottom line is this month is for all Canadians, and I want to wish everybody in this House and across our country a very happy Irish Heritage Month.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie, Mackenzie.
Deny, duck, delay, distract. That is a track record of this Prime Minister over the last 8 years, every time he gets caught in a cover-up. When the media reported that the Prime Minister knew Beijing was meddling in Canadian elections and he did nothing about it, he denied it. He said that the media was wrong. When even more evidence came to light, the Prime Minister ducked for cover. He left the country to avoid questions. When even more evidence piled up, the Liberals deployed delay tactics, filibustering, stonewalling, now reviews and rapporteurs. The Prime Minister will now try to distract Canadians, claiming that a secret committee conducting secret meetings, hearing secret evidence, writing a secret report that the Prime Minister will edit will finally get to the bottom of it. Enough with the delaying, the denying, the ducking, and the distracting. Canadians deserve to know the truth. It's time for a public inquiry to finally uncover the truth that this Prime Minister is so desperately trying to keep covered up.
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart that we commemorate the life and legacy of the former Brampton Senator, the Honourable Lorna Millen, a remarkable woman who dedicated her life to serving her community. Lorna was a trailblazer, a leader, and a champion for Brampton. She served as a Liberal senator for over a decade, leading on important causes such as women's rights and environmental protection. She received many awards and recognitions for her contribution to Canada. She was a member of the Order of Canada and was awarded Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her public service. Her legacy will continue to inspire us. I send my condolences to her husband and a former Liberal member of this House, Ross Millen. Her children, Rob, Jean, and Alec, family, friends, and loved ones. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Surrey Newton.
Mr. Speaker, throughout February, I participated in several Black History Month events. One such event alongside Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and colleagues from London West, Fleetwood, Port Kells, and Steveston, Richmond East was with local leaders which inspired dialogue and support for Black achievement. I also joined Diversity Community Resources Society's first annual Black in BC event, which celebrated Black excellence. Thanks to leadership of CEO Neelam Sohota and COO Garrison Duke, this empowering event connected Black professionals, leaders, and youth alongside with individual and organizational allies in celebrating the achievements, cultures, and contributions of Black Canadians. Members, please join me in thanking Surrey's Black leaders and organizations for their dedication, passion, and commitment to making our community a stronger community.
The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, on April 1st, the government is increasing the excise tax on alcohol, beer, spirits, and wine by over 6%. If inflation wasn't hurting Canadians enough, now they have to dig deeper in their pockets to enjoy their favorite libation. It's expected that this will cost taxpayers, Canadians, consumers, and businesses $125 million more next year. It's enough to drive you to drink. The excise tax affects all producers, big and small, including local breweries like Quail's Brewery in Oro-Medonne, and the entrepreneurs who are just starting out now have to manage a higher cost. So why doesn't the government just pause the tax hike, if even just for a year, or cap it as a reasonable level when inflation's out of control? Put a cork in the escalator, free the beer, let Canadians enjoy their favorite spirit without having to dig deeper in their pocket. What would Bob and Doug McKenzie have to say, Mr. Speaker? Stop hosing us, eh?
The Honourable Member for Mississauga, Aaron Mills.
Mr. Speaker, this week we welcome the Canadian Food Grains Bank to Parliament Hill as they celebrate their 40th anniversary. In a world challenged with inequality, they've played a pivotal role towards ending global food insecurity. This includes funding 106 projects in 34 countries, serving over 900,000 people, providing food assistance to earthquake victims in Turkey and Syria, and supplying relief to Ukrainian refugees. Yesterday, I spoke at a panel to young Canadian Food Grains Bank supporters from across Canada to discuss the value of Canadian aid and critical work that they do. For the past 40 years, our government has been proud to call the Canadian Food Grains Bank a partner and ally. Congratulations to the Canadian Food Grains Bank on their 40-year anniversary as we work together toward a hunger-free world once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
After 8 long years of this Liberal government's catch and police or release policy, Canadians feel unsafe. Police are tired of arresting the same people day after day, week after week, month after month. The Justice Minister has an army of lawyers, an army of bureaucrats, and despite those resources, we've seen nothing on bail. But we as Conservatives have listened to the police. We have listened to victims. We listened to Canadians. I put forth Bill C-313 within a matter of weeks. No army of lawyers, no army of bureaucrats, just a Conservative team that is willing to act. Premiers, police, Canadians ask for change. Crickets is what we heard. How many Canadians need to be victimized? How many police officers need to die? It is time for this lethargic Liberal government to get out of the way so we can clean up their mess on bail.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Well, Canadians, they love watching YouTube, they love listening to music on Apple or Spotify, and they sure enjoy binging on things like Netflix, Disney, and Prime. They love it because they have control over what they watch and when they watch it. And for creators, well, they've never had it better. As long as they have access to the internet, they can start a channel or make a presence online. And as long as they're willing to work hard and put in the creative energy, they can achieve great success, not just in Canada, but around the world. Bill C-11, however, is about to change that. Bill C-11 will give the government the power to censor what Canadians can see and post online. Content creators from across Canada, along with consumer groups, have spoken out about the dangers of this bill. Legal experts have called it a grotesque overreach of government. And when referencing this bill, Margaret Atwood didn't mince her words in calling it creeping totalitarianism. Today, we're calling on the government to kill Bill C-11.
The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Of the Canada Europe Parliamentary Association,
I would like to formally welcome President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on her first official visit to Canada. Welcome.
Canada's relationship with the European Union is the oldest formal relationship the EU has with any industrialized country. We are strategic partners and close friends, bonded by our shared history, common values, close cooperation, and close people-to-people ties.
The EU have wholeheartedly supported Ukraine and will continue to for as long as it takes.
We know Canada-EU relations are key to safety, prosperity, and security. That's why we stand united. This visit aims to strengthen our bilateral ties, further trade, grow our economies, and continue to uphold the rule of law.
Welcome, welcome, bienvenue, benvenuta, and benvenudos, European Commissioner President. Thank you.
Bravo. I just want to remind the honourable members that statements are being made, so if they don't mind just listening in, because there's some very interesting stuff being said. The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, generations of Indigenous people have experienced and continue to be impacted by violence at the hands of Canada's colonial systems. Geraldine Gladstein is a constituent in my riding and an Indigenous woman from Panama who's been using her platform as a filmmaker to shine a light on the ongoing genocide in Canada. Geraldine's Our Missing Sisters initiative focuses on the Highway of Tears and aims to honor the lives of those who were murdered and those who've gone missing, but also to engage Canadians broadly in our collective responsibility. For too long, the work of reconciliation and fighting for Indigenous rights has fallen to Indigenous people. We must all take on this work, and it's critical that the government step up and implement all the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. As we honor the lives of those we've lost, we must also take immediate action to stop the ongoing violence against Indigenous people. Thank you.
If I can have your attention, please. Order. Order. Very good. We'll continue now. The
Honourable Member from Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, allow me to pay tribute to those who carry on a very Quebec tradition, which is part of our history and identity, that is sugaring off season. Quebec accounts for 72% of global maple syrup production, and everything else is simply fake and should not be tasted. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec maple industry goes hand in hand with research and new technologies and accounts for $500 million in annual exports. Every spring in my riding, nothing can stop these passionate men and women who are very proud of this industry and highly perfectionist. Thanks to them, thousands of us gather in sugar shacks to enjoy food with our families. Mirabel welcomes visitors from all over the world during this season, and it's thanks to Tourisme Mirabel and its Director General, Stéphane Michaud, who does exceptional work to showcase our national treasure. Mr. Speaker, I might be biased, but I would like to declare proudly and solemnly that Mirabel is the world capital of the maple industry. Welcome and happy sugaring.
For Brentford, Brent.
Mr. Speaker, after months of denying the possibility of foreign interference in this country, the Prime Minister finally declares yesterday that there would be an investigation. However, a so-called rapporteur, personally selected by the Prime Minister, with secret hearings, secret evidence, and secret conclusions, all being drawn behind closed doors, is not exactly the open and transparent inquiry Conservatives had in mind. Right. It's no surprise that the Prime Minister is looking to bury the truth from Canadians, as for 5 straight years, the Liberals have blatantly ignored recommendations from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. As a result, this government has failed to respond to threats posed by foreign states against Canada. Enough is enough. An independent public inquiry must be established in order to openly and honestly understand how to eliminate foreign interference in this country.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are good at saying sorry, but sorry, not sorry, because we are kicking bleep with our Canadian talent on the world stage. we are highlighting this week Made New campaign. It's celebrating Canadian film and television right around the world. As people are popping out the popcorn and the snacks to watch the Oscars this weekend, you're going to have an opportunity to celebrate some amazing Canadian-made films with Canadians in them, including Turning Red by Domichi. I really like that one. Women Talking by Sarah Polley. The Sea Beast by Chris Williams. Fire of Love by Ina Fishman. So much more for you to check out. We have great Canadian talent. We're making a mark on the world stage. Let's keep celebrating Canadian talent.
La présidence souhaite.
The chair is ready to rule.
Who wish to participate remotely in committees, be it in committee or elsewhere. On February 15th, 2023,
I just want to make sure everybody hears this and is going to be going along with it and understands how to use their headsets.
On February 15th, 2023, the member for Salaberry-sur-Roi sought guidance from the chair on the technical requirements for remote participation, and more precisely, on the use of House-approved headsets. The member also inquired about the mechanism to ensure compliance regarding the use of the appropriate equipment. Since the House began holding hybrid proceedings, members have been advised and continuously reminded that the effectiveness of remote participation is based in large part on the use of proper equipment. This ranges from an optimal internet connection, the type of device used, and includes the need for adequate sound quality. Indeed, headsets with an integrated microphone ensure suitable audio quality while respecting the health and safety of interpreters.
And so if they're going to use the headsets, they'll know what I've just said, and there's no reasons or excuses for not being heard or not going through. The chair has previously reminded members of this and the availability of the House administration to provide assistance as required. In a statement from November 26, 2021, the chair stated at page 233 of the debates, and I quote, "Members are responsible for ensuring that their internet connection and audio quality are strong to allow them to participate. A wired connection is more reliable than Wi-Fi, and using computer provided by the House is a better option than using a tablet or cell phone. Using a headset with an integrated microphone will ensure the best sound quality, which is essential for allowing our interpreters to do their work safely. If you have not been provided a headset, please let our IT team know," and I unquote. Proceedings of the House must be available in both official languages. The ability for members to be heard and to hear what other members are saying in the official language of their choice through simultaneous interpretation is vital to our parliamentary system. Thus, technology and the use of the appropriate equipment currently available to everyone plays a fundamental role in ensuring members are heard and understood. I may not dispense, but I would wish that everyone would listen. Le personnel de...
While technical staff and interpreters work tirelessly
From the top? Do you want me to start from... Le personnel de soutien technique...
While technical staff and interpreters work tirelessly to resolve issues as they arise, using House-approved equipment is necessary not only to prevent interruptions, but to ensure workplace health and safety. In this regard, the Labour Program of Employment and Social Development Canada has recently issued the following directive to the Translation Bureau, quote, that during meetings with simultaneous interpretation, the interpretation work will be done only when the virtual participants are wearing an ISO-compliant microphone, unquote.
The House has been informed by the Translation Bureau that their interpreters will be operating under this directive going forward. They will not be able to provide simultaneous interpretation if members and also witnesses, in the case of committees, participating remotely are not wearing the appropriate headsets. As an institution, the House continues supporting the ongoing efforts made by the Translation Bureau to ensure the safety of the interpreters.
Consequently, members received an official communiqué by email on February 17, 2023, and a reminder was also sent this morning informing them that the use of House-approved headsets will be mandatory for remote participation in parliamentary proceedings. A list of other compliant devices was also included in the communiqué. And if there is something that I would like to point out, please check the devices that you have, that you used in the past, and compare them with and make sure that your current device is on the list. Members will find copies of the communiqué on each desk in the chamber as well as in the lobbies.
Over the past year, the House has supplied members with new ISO-compliant equipment. While the onus is on members to use the approved headsets when participating in proceedings, the Chair will also provide assistance to ensure all members are in compliance with technical requirements. In cases where the Chair is made aware of compliant equipment is not being used, a member participating remotely will be interrupted and/or not recognized for debate. Issues pertaining to the audio system and simultaneous interpretation should continue to be brought to the attention of the Chair. Considering the whips often know in advance who will be participating in the proceedings, the Chair will also be looking for their support to ensure the appropriate headsets are worn and that everyone is conforming to the new directive. Les ambassadeurs.
The IT ambassadors remain available to help members prepare for their interventions in the House and in committees. Members should not hesitate to reach out to them to confirm their equipment compliance or to perform sound checks. In addition, members participating remotely are encouraged to avail themselves of the opportunity to participate in the sound checks for remote participants in advance of each committee meeting.
Be important. It can make an important impact in ensuring that meetings can unfold with fewer issues and help ensure we can respect our official language's commitments. As always, the health and safety of interpreters, other staff members continues to be a priority for the House of Commons. I want to thank the members for their attention, and if they don't want to hear this long message again, please conform with the directives. Thank you. Oral questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's been 10 years since the Beijing authoritarian government has been helping the Prime Minister, beginning with a $200,000 donation to the Trudeau Foundation and meddling in 2 elections to support Liberal candidates. What does the Prime Minister want to do now? He wants to strike a secret committee to investigate secretly and formulate recommendations secretly. And what happens at the committee will stay in the committee. What does the Prime Minister have to hide? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, we have done much to reassure Canadians about what we're doing to counter foreign meddling in our elections. He talked about 10 years, but 13 years ago it was that CSIS raised the issue of foreign meddling in our elections. My colleague was Minister of Democratic institutions at the time, and he did nothing. That's the opposite of our record in government, and we will continue to do what needs to be done.
13 years. Why have they never done anything about it? 10 years ago, the dictatorship in Beijing gave the Trudeau Foundation $200,000. They then interfered in 2 elections to help keep the Liberals in power. They've even helped campaign for certain Liberal candidates. And what's the solution now? The Prime Minister proposes a secret committee that will do a secret investigation with secret outcomes. Mr. Speaker, this committee will follow the rule of Fight Club. First rule is no one talks about the committee. Why is the Prime Minister trying so hard to keep everything so secret?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition knows very well that our government has taken very robust measures to protect democratic institutions from foreign interference. Last night, the Prime Minister announced additional measures that will reassure Canadians not only, Mr. Speaker, that our democratic institutions are protected from foreign interference, but those who seek to interfere with these very institutions will be held to account. And that's something, Mr. Speaker, the previous Conservative government did absolutely nothing about.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I forgot to mention, other than the secret committee that will see secret information and never actually publish any information, there will also be something called a rapporteur, a fake new position that they have invented. Rapporteur. Does it come with a costume? Maybe a cape and a sword? Is the best they can come up with a fake position doing fake work? Why is it that they're trying to cover up the truth, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister for Inter-Parliamentary Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we didn't need another reason to see that the Leader of the Opposition has never taken this issue seriously. In fact, yesterday, Mr. Speaker, he said something that was shocking. When I pointed out to him that this has existed as a challenge to Canadian democratic institutions, including when he served as Minister of Democratic Reform, he said, of course the previous Conservative government did nothing about it because it wasn't in their partisan advantage to do anything about it. Think about that, Mr. Speaker. Protecting our democracy is not a partisan issue, it's a Canadian issue.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Why won't the Prime Minister stand up today and answer a question? Why is he hiding? Why won't he stand in his seat? What is he hiding from Canadians that he stands behind this substandard minister? He's been hiding this for 10 years, Mr. Speaker. Whatever it is that he's hiding, it must be bad. It must be really bad. How bad is it?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it is the height of irresponsibility when talking about national security to talk about the fact that national security should just be set aside, that we should just to open up this as if it could be done. Mr. Speaker, it is not something that I think is being responsible. Responsible leadership is saying that every member of this House, every single member of this House is totally and utterly committed to protecting Canadian democracy. The assertion that anything else is true is offensive, untrue, and playing games with national security is not appropriate.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, if the Prime Minister really was interested in protecting national security, he wouldn't be hiding. He'd stand up right now and answer the question. Instead, he hides behind these two stooges who protect him.
Order! On both sides, order. I want to remind the honourable members two things. One, please use parliamentary language and be judicious. And two, we can't do indirectly what we can't do directly in the House. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition from the top, I'm sure he'll use both principles in his questions. Thank you.
Prime Minister was hiding yesterday from the House. He's hiding today in the House. He's hid for the last 10 years.
Once again, I want to remind the honourable members that we can't do indirectly what we can't do directly. Now, I don't want to have to move to the next question. I'm sure the honourable member from the beginning, and he would use parliamentary judgment. The honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister has been hiding this for the last 10 years. 10 years ago, he found out that the Trudeau Foundation got $200,000. Over the last 5 years, he's had briefing after briefing warning of interference by Beijing in our elections to support him. And now he's hiding the truth behind a secret committee that will not provide public information. Whatever he's hiding, it must be bad. It must be really bad. How bad?
Yeah. The Honourable Leader, Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member across, the Leader of the Official Opposition, would know well where the Prime Minister is today. He's meeting with the President of the European Commission to talk about national security issues.
Order. I just want to remind the... Order. Again, I want to remind the honourable members that there's one thing that they cannot do is refer to either the presence or the absence of someone in the chamber. I will let the Honourable Government House Leader start from the top, please, and I'm sure he'll be judicious in his words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, that question was asked despite you saying that it was unparliamentary several times. I want to put as a matter of record. But let me say this, Mr. Speaker, and be very clear. One of the things that we had as a long tradition in this country was to make sure that when we were dealing with national security, that we did not use national security as a way to play partisan politics and to grind an axe on one another. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this issue of foreign interference has been a serious issue since well before this government. It was a matter that was that the honourable that the member across was responsible for as a minister. They did not take action. We have
Honorable député de la Prairie.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, yesterday at a press conference on Chinese meddling, the Prime Minister showed that once again he hasn't understood a thing. We wanted a public inquiry. Public. He gives the job to a committee that's bound by secrecy. That's not public. That's secret. We wanted an independent investigation. Independent. The Prime Minister appoints a special rapporteur, chosen by him, answerable to him, who reports to him. There's nothing independent about that. Why does the Prime Minister refuse to set up an independent public commission of inquiry? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was crystal clear yesterday. Since we took office, we took strong steps to counter foreign meddling in our elections. We also are going to appoint a special rapporteur to investigate all of these issues transparently and make recommendations to the government as to the next steps that we will continue to take to reassure Canadians that our elections are free and democratic and that everyone in this place was legitimately elected by Canadians. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, what the Liberals don't get is that this is not about the opposition versus the government. It's not about one party against another. It's about public confidence in our elections. What we need to know is if the deck is already stacked. If we can't assess the integrity of our elections in a transparent way, honestly, we're in big trouble. We're straying into Banana Republic territory here, with all due respect for bananas. What's it going to take for them to set up a public and independent commission of inquiry? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we share precisely the same concern that my colleague opposite expressed in terms of reassuring Canadians, as we've done since taking office, to reassure Canadians that our intelligence services are effectively collecting intelligence and that we are protecting our system. Since we took office, we've taken further steps, and that's precisely what the Prime Minister announced last night as well. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. The allegations of foreign meddling are serious and disturbing, and that's why we called for a public inquiry at committee. We want a public and independent process. Why is the Prime Minister not respecting those two criteria? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I obviously appreciate the question from the Leader of the NDP. We share the concern that all people here should share about the importance of strengthening our democratic institutions. That's precisely what we've done since taking office. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced further steps, extra steps, to add to those protections. We understand the need to do this transparently and openly, and that is exactly what we will keep doing.
Député de Burnaby Sud. If the Prime Minister really wanted to restore the confidence of Canadians, he would call a public inquiry. Here's the situation. We've got a Conservative Party that only cares about playing political games with something as so serious as our democracy. New Democrats understand that this is serious, and it's not an opportunity to play political games. That's why we demanded a public inquiry in committee. There's two criteria that we have. The process has to be independent, and it has to be public. Now, will the government confirm that their process will answer questions about what the Prime Minister knew, when he knew it, and what he did about it?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague values transparency. So does this government. That is why yesterday, when we announced the imminent appointment of a special rapporteur, we said that we would abide by and respect any recommendation that that individual would put forward, including up to a public inquiry. Equally, Mr. Speaker, I would remind all members of this chamber that we also announced we would commence consultations on a foreign agent registry, as well as the launch of a coordinator to fight against foreign interference. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely hope that is something that all members in this chamber are united on. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
The Liberals and the NDP are now openly working together to cover up the truth. And yesterday, the Prime Minister kicked the can down the road by announcing that a hand-picked rapporteur is going to maybe looking into the interference. He announced that a secret committee with secret hearings will hear secret evidence and then give the Prime Minister a secret conclusion. When will he call a public inquiry and tell everybody what he's hiding?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you heard the government announce yesterday that it is our intention to appoint a special rapporteur who presents the qualifications and the experience and the knowledge to navigate and survey the options on the best next practical steps that we can take to protect our democratic institutions, including our elections. And is this truly what the Conservatives have resorted to now, denigrating the very institutions that are there to protect our democracy? Is that all they have to offer, denigration? I sincerely hope not.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
That sounds desperate. It's a special rapporteur. I get it. The Liberals are blocking a public inquiry. The NDP is blocking a parliamentary inquiry. And as a result, Canadians get a secret committee to look into interference by a foreign dictatorship in our democracy. It's shameful work by the cover-up coalition. Will they commit to a truly independent and actually public inquiry to look into what the Prime Minister is hiding?
The Honourable Minister for Interparliamentary Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our honourable colleague keeps referring to some secret committee. I think that would be very disparaging for the women and men who serve on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, Mr. Speaker. We set up in legislation an oversight mechanism to look at these very issues, something the previous Conservative government refused to do. Members of her party serve on that committee, Mr. Speaker. Members of all political parties represented in this House and senators, they've done good work and will continue to work with them on these important issues.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, Beijing's foreign interference is a serious threat, a national threat. It threatens the integrity of democratic institutions, social cohesion, the economy, long-term prosperity, and fundamental rights and freedoms. But this government hasn't treated the threat seriously. It's hid behind all sorts of excuses and accusations like anti-Asian racism. Now it's hiding behind a secret committee with secret hearings, secret evidence, and secret conclusions, all controlled by the Prime Minister. When is this government going to come clean with us and with Canadians about what exactly is going on?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Speaker, my colleague knows well that this government takes the work of fighting against foreign interference very seriously. That is why we introduced Bill C-59, which would give CSIS the threat reduction measure powers that they need to address and mitigate that risk. That's why we introduced Bill C-76 to crack down on foreign funding, which could interfere with our elections, but with the corresponding transparency to create the NCCOP, the NCIRA, all of which ensures that we can be upfront with Canadians so that we can defend our democratic institutions. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives should rise above the fray and see that this is not a partisan issue.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Governor, if the government treated this threat seriously, it would listen to the advice of CSIS. CSIS has said that an effective way to counter foreign interference is through sunlight and transparency, to build resilience by informing Canadians about interference threat activities. This government's done the opposite. First, it hid behind excuses and accusations. Then it hid behind a secret committee and behind a special rapporteur. This government has been anything but transparent about this. It's burying the truth in process. Why?
The Honourable Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend likes to refer to what CSIS said. Let's talk about what they said in 2013, when the Leader of the Opposition was Minister responsible for democratic institutions. They specifically warned 10 years ago, when diaspora groups in Canada are subject to clandestine and deceptive manipulation by a foreign power in order for it to garner support for its policies and values, these activities constitute a threat to the security of Canada. What did the then Conservative government do for 2 years after that 2013 threat, Mr. Speaker? Absolutely nothing.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the cover-up continues as more and more facts are revealed in the media about the Prime Minister's inaction on the Beijing Communist regime's meddling in the elections. The Prime Minister wants to keep up the cover-up. Yesterday, he announced that a secret committee with secret hearings, secret evidence, and secret findings was his big solution to this serious problem. This morning, Liberal members on the Procedures Committee added another layer, blocking the three opposition parties' motion to call Katie Telford. Will they have the courage to let the Prime Minister's senior advisor reveal her secrets, yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague knows full well that we've been very transparent with the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. A number of ministers have appeared over the months. We've been available as we should have been. All the officials responsible for security and intelligence services in Canada have been available. And I will have the great privilege myself of attending with the Foreign Affairs Minister perhaps in a couple of days to answer questions from our colleagues as we should and as we have always done. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, why not bring along the Prime Minister's special advisor then? A special committee with secret hearings, secret evidence, secret witnesses chosen by PMO with secret findings. And who gets to choose which findings to make public? You'll never guess. The Prime Minister's office. And that is why we need Katie Telford to testify. What she says goes to the Prime Minister. Why doesn't she come and tell us what she said at committee? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague is whipping up a lot of indignation here, as is to be expected, but we have always been transparent with all parliamentary committees. That is the responsibility of ministers. We are accountable to our parliamentary colleagues at committee. That's exactly what we've done. And we've also made available all the senior officials from the security and intelligence services, deputy ministers and so on, to answer questions. And they'd be happy to appear again at the committee's request. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, foreign meddling in our elections requires a transparent investigation. Here's the Prime Minister's idea of transparency. He's putting the investigation in the hands of the National Security Committee, whose members aren't just bound to secrecy, they're bound to perpetual secrecy. A committee that meets behind closed doors where neither the public nor parliamentarians can watch the proceedings. A committee that can't say who the witnesses are or exactly what they said. A committee whose report will inevitably be redacted. Where's the transparency in all that? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, our government has increased the level of transparency with the creation of NACICOP and INSERA. And yesterday we announced that we're going to appoint a special rapporteur to navigate and assess all the options and make recommendations. And the government will respect that choice and the recommendations of the special rapporteur. That is how we are respecting the value of transparency. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm still shivering from that answer. Mr. Speaker, we need a transparent and independent investigation, but the Prime Minister is creating a so-called independent special rapporteur, but he gets to choose who. Then that person chosen by the Prime Minister decides what to investigate, but also what not to investigate. The Prime Minister's selected special rapporteur will decide whether the Prime Minister should do more to combat foreign meddling. Mr. Speaker, this special rapporteur may well be special, but who can trust that he or she will be independent? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement
Mr. Speaker, the government is going to choose a special rapporteur who has all the qualifications and expertise that's needed to navigate all the options and make recommendations based on the best possible advice that can be given to the government. That is how we are going to respect the value of transparency, to protect our democratic institutions, and to protect our elections. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, I'm getting even more goosebumps. Mr. Speaker, foreign meddling in our elections requires a transparent, independent, and also public investigation. We know it won't be transparent because the committee is legally bound to secrecy. It simply isn't authorized to be transparent. We know the inquiry won't be independent either because the Prime Minister personally chooses the rapporteur. So since we know the inquiry won't be transparent or independent, it obviously won't be public either. So what's the Prime Minister trying so hard to hide from the public? The Honourable Minister of Interparliamentary Affairs. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is repeating things about a secret committee. That's a committee where the bloc has membership. The member from the bloc will hear all the high-level appropriate information and on this issue and other issues of national security, and the government will be sharing the reports of that committee. So this is a process that the bloc is a full participant in, among others. And this is not the only process that we've created to fight this threat.
Albert Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, instead of following the advice of CSIS to provide transparency and sunlight when it comes to Beijing's election interference, the Prime Minister announced what amounts to a cover-up, a secret committee with secret evidence and secret conclusions redacted by the PMO, all to bury the truth. No transparency, no sunlight, total secrecy. What does the Prime Minister have to hide?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, honestly, I would have thought that my colleague was paying attention to the announcement yesterday when we said we would be appointing a special rapporteur who would possess the expertise and the knowledge to put forward a recommendation up to and including a public inquiry so that we could address the very serious allegations with regards to this matter. More importantly, this government has taken concrete action to combat foreign interference with the additional powers that we've given to our national security community, but with the additional transparency so that we can be upfront with Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to descend into partisanship. Our government is focused on protecting our institutions and Canadians.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, what the Prime Minister announced yesterday is nothing more than a smokescreen with no transparency. Indeed, the only thing that is transparent is the transparent attempt by Liberals to cover up what this Prime Minister knows about Beijing's election interference. And consistent with this, today at committee, the Liberals are filibustering to block the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff from having to testify. Why? What is the Prime Minister so afraid of? What does he have to hide?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I have every reason to believe that the member opposite, for the entirety of his life, has fought for Canadian democracy. I would believe that he knows that I have done the same. I believe that he would know every member in this House has done the same. I believe that the member opposite would also know that foreign interference is a threat to our democracy, that the objective of any nation to interfere in our democracy is not a threat against a party or a government. It is a threat against our democracy, and that, Mr. Speaker, we are united in making sure that foreign interference is repelled. But, Mr. Speaker, national security cannot be played with. We need to deal carefully and delicately.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is the Prime Minister doesn't want accountability on Beijing's election interference that helped the Liberals win. He wants a secret committee with secret hearings and secret evidence and a secret conclusion, all controlled by the Prime Minister. Canadians deserve far better than this, Mr. Speaker. They deserve the truth. They deserve accountability. They deserve a true defense of our democracy. We need transparency from this government, and if they can't do it, then they should get out of the way because Conservatives will get it done. When will they call a public inquiry, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, it is elections and democratic process that decides who gets out of the way, not members opposite. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would say that back when Justice O'Connor and Justice Iacobucci issued their reports talking about the need for parliamentarians to be able to see into every corner of government, it was the Conservatives that opposed that idea, that the secret committee that they're maligning and attacking is one of which their own members sit, where they are given the opportunity to see into every corner of government, where they're able to see every document that is protected by national security. I hope that the party opposite is not suggesting that we should say to our Five Eyes partners that all of our national security information should be put on display.
The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The committee that these members sit on this side of the House are banned by the Liberals from talking about what takes place. Today, Speaker, I was at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee where the Liberals were engaged in one of their cover-up filibusters. So my question is to the chair of that committee to find out if she will resume the committee today at 3:30 so that there can be a vote on having the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, testify on what she knew and when she knew it about the foreign interference efforts. So if the chair won't stand, will the vice chair of the committee stand and tell us if that committee will resume today?
Okay. The Honourable Government. One moment. I want to make sure all the rules are followed exactly correctly. Okay. The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, as Vice Chair of the committee, I can confirm that after 3 hours of Liberal filibustering this morning over calling Katie Telford to committee to answer about the Prime Minister's and what he knew about Beijing's interference, the Chair arbitrarily suspended the meeting. I am pleased to report that the 3 opposition parties have agreed to provide the resources necessary to resume this meeting and finish this Liberal filibuster today. Mr. Speaker, as Vice Chair of the committee, I am proud and able and willing to regavel the meeting to order at 3:30 if the member for Waterloo will not. Mr. Speaker, the question is, will the Liberals show up or continue the cover-up?
The Honourable Member for order. Order. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Has shared its partial research findings into the horrific deaths of children at the Alberni Indian Residential School, which operated on its
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, Sashat First Nation has shared its partial research findings into the horrific deaths of children at the Alberni Indian Residential School, which operated on its lands without consent for almost 80 years. 17 suspected unmarked graves have been identified through ground-penetrating radar. The community also confirmed at least 67 students died while at the school. The nation has made calls for truth and justice, including funding to complete this research, removal of the remaining buildings, and replace it with a healing and cultural center. Will the Prime Minister honor the Sashat calls for truth and justice?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for this important question, not only for all the survivors and families that were sent to this hideous institution, but also for the communities that are going through a lot of pain and trauma trying to come to grips with that grim reality. This continues to shock the conscience of Canadians, and I have spoken to Chief Counsellor Ken Watts on a number of occasions, indeed visited the community twice, and have undertaken to do all what we can on behalf of Canada to make sure that there is some measure of healing that is afforded to those survivors as well as to the community. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Canadian brewery workers are worried. Labour unions representing them, including Unifor and SEIU, are sounding the alarm because the federal government plans to increase beer taxes by 6.3% on April 1st. This would be the largest federal beer tax increase in the last 40 years, and it's happening with no debate in Parliament. Beer production costs are soaring and sales are declining. This tax will have a huge impact on jobs in Canada. Will this government help to protect brewery jobs by cancelling this unprecedented and automatic beer tax increase?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, we understand the work that brewers do in this country, and whether it's small craft brewers or the large producers, this is an important industry for our tourism sector, but also for Canadians for recreational purposes. Mr. Speaker, we cannot comment on what's going to be in the budget. We have heard from the brewery industry, and we are taking this matter under advisement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, the inherent rights of the Métis were confirmed in the Constitution Act of 1982, and 40 years ago today, the Métis National Council was officially formed. Since its inception, the MNC have been fierce advocates for Métis across Canada. Can the Minister of Northern Affairs please update this House on the federal government's partnership with the MNC and the important work we're doing together with Métis?
The Honourable Minister for Northern Affairs.
Thank you for that important question. I'd like to thank the member for Yukon for all of his hard work on all of these issues. I congratulate the Métis National Council for 40 years of hard work for the rights of Métis across the homeland, building on the legacy of our ancestors. And I commend Cassidy Caron for her stewardship of the council, and I also commend and congratulate all of the previous presidents of the Métis National Council over the last 40 years. Our government is working hand in hand with MNC on issues such as reconciliation, housing, the environment. There's lots of work to do, Mr. Speaker, but we are making progress.
The Honourable Member for Calgary for Swan.
8 years of Liberal failures, they continue to break records, just not ones many can celebrate. Not only are 1 in 5 Canadians skipping meals, but food bank usage is at a record high. A Mississauga food bank saw a 41% increase in usage, serving more than 13,000 people in January alone. That's the average attendance of an Ottawa Senators game. Why does the Prime Minister continue to brag and celebrate his failed policies that sent 1.5 million Canadians into a food bank? Or was that his plan all along?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians are going through a hard time. There's an inflationary cycle that has gripped the world. And the fact that in this country, Mr. Speaker, our inflation is lower than the average in the G7 and in the EU is not good enough for Canadians. And that's why we have a robust set of affordability measures in place, Mr. Speaker. The other side provides no hope, no plan, no vision for the future. We do. That's our job. We've got the backs of Canadians.
Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
They got the back pockets of Canadians, and we would never, ever vote for policies that made housing double. After 8 years of their failures, rents and mortgages have doubled since 2015. Random Liberal Bill Morneau said that this government overspent. That made the Bank of Canada jack up its rates to counter that. And now CIBC is saying 20% of its mortgages are at a point where monthly payments don't even cover interest anymore. So will the most expensive housing minister in Canada's history stop patting himself on the back for a job well failed and admit that he broke housing in this country?
The Honourable Minister for Sports.
There's everything that has happened in Canada and in the world these past few years, including the pandemic. What we need to remember is that this government has been there for those who needed help the most. It's also important to remember that after years of a Conservative government, when our government took office, we lifted 1 million Canadians out of poverty, and we also created more jobs over the past 10 years than were created during the Conservatives' time as government. So our government has done more for the people of Canada than the Conservatives have ever or will ever done.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians are struggling. Seniors are being pulled out of retirement and forced to re-enter the workforce in order to pay for food and housing costs. Grocery prices are out of control. The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment across Canadian cities is $2,000 per month, compared to $1,200 per month in 2015. Will this Prime Minister step aside and let the Conservatives fix what they've broken?
The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
It's really important to look at the facts. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, when that party, the Conservative Party, was in power, their plan for seniors was to raise the age of retirement to 67. Mr. Speaker, first thing we did, we reversed that back to 65. We then enhanced the old age security. We then enhanced the guaranteed income supplement. Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, the party opposite has opposed measures to support Canadians and has stopped us from doing the work for seniors. We won't take any lessons from them, and we're going to continue to make sure we deliver for seniors. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this is the year that Canadians will feel the full impact of the Bank of Canada's 4.25% base rate hike. According to Statistics Canada, 35% of Canadian households reported that it had been difficult for them to meet their financial needs over the past 12 months. 44% of respondents expressed concern about their household's ability to buy a home or even pay the rent. Will the Prime Minister admit that his out-of-control spending has fueled inflation and created conditions that are impoverishing millions of Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, we have implemented so many supports to help people get through the pandemic, and those supports did not create inflation. No matter what the Conservatives might say with far-fetched theories, they don't have a plan for the economy. They don't have a plan for housing. They don't have a plan for climate change. They don't even believe in climate change, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the floor, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to follow our plans and policies to help Canadians. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-de-la-Belle. Mr. Speaker, the House Procedure Committee has voted in favor of an independent public inquiry chaired by a commissioner chosen with the agreement of all parties in this House. The Bloc, the NDP, and the Conservatives were able to set partisanship aside because what is at stake here, Mr. Speaker, is the public's confidence in their electoral system. What's at stake here is not partisanship. Does the government really believe that it can restore public confidence with a secretive committee and a reporter who reports directly to the Prime Minister? The Honourable Minister of Interparliamentary Affairs. Mr. Speaker, as I said a few moments ago, we share the same concerns as our colleagues when it comes to strengthening our democratic institutions and strengthening them against foreign interference by countries including China. We have taken action, we have implemented many measures, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to further strengthen our democratic institutions. That's exactly what Canadians expect of a responsible, transparent government like ours. The Honourable Member for Lanty-de-la-Belle. Mr. Speaker, in a democracy, people are not guaranteed to win elections, but elections do need to be conducted properly, without cheating, without money received on the sly, without voting under duress, and without foreign interference. That is what democracy is all about, Mr. Speaker. Those are the necessary conditions for us to accept the results of an election. If people lose trust in their electoral system, democracy itself is weakened. That is why we need a public and independent inquiry. Why is the Prime Minister stubbornly refusing this? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. I share the concerns and worries of my honourable colleagues. This is why we set up an independent panel which verified that the two elections in 2019 and 2021 were fair and free elections. And we will follow up on this with a process which will be led by a special reporter. The reporter will table recommendations that the government will follow. Yes, I agree. This is all very important, and we will continue to protect our democratic institutions.
Okanagan Similkaming Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, CIBC is the first bank to show that on 20% of its mortgages, the monthly payment doesn't cover interest, increasing what the borrower owes on top of their original mortgage. Does the Minister of Finance agree that inevitably these higher debts must be paid down, something that borrowers can't afford now, let alone at higher costs later? And if she believes that's true, why does she continue to relentlessly borrow, and spend when it's not only inflationary, but a debt that Canadians cannot afford today, let alone tomorrow, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue on our prudent fiscal track that we laid down in the fall economic statement and in Budget 2022. It's intriguing, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservatives are having a little laugh fest today because, Mr. Speaker, that's prudent.
The Honourable Minister from the top so we can hear the whole answer, please.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps we should go back to the past, Mr. Speaker, and talk about 9 years of stagflation during the Harper government when the Canadian economy didn't grow more than 1%, maybe 1.2%, and which country in the world is positioned to lead the G7? Mr. Speaker, in growth next year, Canada. Is that good enough for Canadians that are struggling with inflation? No. That's why we have affordability measures in place. They voted against them. We're voting with Canadians. They can hoo and haw. We're here for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkaming Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians aren't buying the house of debt that this minister's selling. So in Kelowna, we are now recognized as one of Canada's top 5 highest rents, and it shows. This Minister of Housing has failed to house the homeless on the streets of Kelowna. Now, with rentals and home prices doubling, there's no way that his policies can help them, let alone the middle class and those working to join it. Does this minister understand, Mr. Speaker, that he's failed the people of Kelowna? If so, will he move out of his office today to make room for someone else, or is he waiting for an eviction notice from the Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it is really rich to hear rhetoric coming from the other side when they have voted against every single measure that we've put in place to help Canadian renters. When we put together the Canada Housing Benefit, they voted against it. When we introduced a $500 top-up payment that is going to almost 2 million Canadian renters, they not only voted against it, they played procedural games last fall in this House to delay payment that was going to almost 2 million Canadian renters to help them with the cost of rent. Canadians can see through their rhetoric, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Hello, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years under this Prime Minister, home and housing prices have skyrocketed. Successive interest rate hikes have been a blow to homeowners. The average cost of a mortgage in Canada, Mr. Speaker, has more than doubled and now averages $3,000. So, people can't access property, young adults are living in their parents' basements, and there are students living in shelters. When will this Prime Minister acknowledge the problems that he caused, show some compassion, and finally help Canadians? The Honourable Minister.
Help first-time home buyers access the dream of home ownership. We're building more supply by working with municipalities and provinces to get more barriers out of the way, to build more housing across the housing spectrum. What do? They vote against all these measures. In addition to that, it's been a year, more than a year, since their leader took helm of that leadership, and they don't have a housing plan. They don't have a plan in place. They don't have the voting record. When they were in government, they spent meager amounts of money, and every time that we bring measures in place to help Canadians across the housing spectrum, they vote against it. Canadians can see through that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, our government has made significant efforts to recognize historical wrongdoing and to recognize the criminalization of vulnerable communities throughout Canada. Today, as part of these ongoing efforts, the government has reaffirmed its commitment towards all women and all 2S LGBTQI+ communities by making several offences eligible for expungement. Can the Minister of Public Safety inform the House of the positive impact that this announcement will have on Canadians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question. We must recognize the historical injustices that have historically targeted vulnerable communities. That is why I announced today that bawdy house, indecency, and abortion-related offences will be eligible for expungement. These offences have primarily affected women and members of the LGBTQI+ community. We need to also protect the right to choose and the right to safe sexual health services.
Bridge.
Bill C-11 is an unnecessary and grotesque overreach of government control. It censors what Canadians can see online, what they can post online, what they can hear online. The minister has said that this bill is about supporting Canadian culture, but that's actually not true. You see, the bill actually stifles creators. It stifles their voices. And in fact, subject matter experts have actually said that it likens Canada to countries like China or North Korea. So will the Prime Minister stop this damning overreach and kill Bill C-11?
The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives had an option. They could side with Canadians, they could side with our music creators, with our film producers, with our actors, but they decided to side with the tech giants, abandoning the cultural sector.
That's terrible.
And that's a shame in itself. There's another thing, Mr. Speaker. I don't think they understand the bill. I'm not even sure they read it at this moment.
I don't think they did.
After, because you read the bill, it's very clear. It's simply asking the streamers to support our culture. They understand that. Everybody understands that, but the Conservatives.
Member for Lethbridge.
I would invite the member opposite to listen to Canadians. When they came to the House of Commons and when they came to the Senate, they said the same thing over and over and over again. Creators, content experts, and Canadians at large do not want this bill. It stifles their voice, it prevents Canadian culture from being furthered, and it likens us to places like North Korea and China. It's a terrible bill. It needs to be killed. Will the minister concede to Canadian voices, give them the power, and stop this terrible legislation?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, we have to give it to my colleague. She's very creative, which is very good in the cultural world. But if you listen to the people in the music sector, in the film industry, the music industry, they're all behind this.
Yes.
Why? Because it's asking streamers that make a lot of money. It's fine. We're happy for them. It's just asking the streamers and Netflix, this of this world, to contribute to the creation of more music from here, for more films, for more television. It's good for Kenyans, not for the Conservatives. Good for Kenyans.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government likes to be in control, and they showed us that once again yesterday when they created a secret committee with secret hearings and secret evidence, secret conclusions. That is total Liberal control. But that's what motivates this government. That's what motivates them with the CRTC Act that they want to amend. But you know what this government can't control? The province of Quebec's will to be heard. Quebec wants to be heard. When will the Liberal government convene the committee so that Quebec can explain its stance? The Honourable Heritage Minister. Mr. Speaker, my colleague is from the same province as me. We're both Quebecois. I don't know if he's spoken to the La Disque Federation, but La Disque supports our bill, and the Union of Artists also supports our bill. Music producers, film producers, TV and movie producers support our bill. There's a lot of support for our bill. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because it's good for Quebec's culture. It's good for Canada's culture. The Conservatives don't like it because they don't care about culture, but we care about culture. We stand up for it, and we always will, Mr. Speaker.
East.
Mr. Speaker, seniors around the world and in Canada were some of the hardest hit by the pandemic. Conscious of the lessons we've learned from the pandemic and given Canada's rapidly aging population, can the Minister of Seniors please update this House on the work that she is doing with Canada's international partners to advance the rights and interests of older individuals, both here at home and abroad?
The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague from St. John East for that important question and for ongoing advocacy for seniors. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to inform this House that Canada this week joined the UN Open-Ending Working Group on Aging. Canada will be using this opportunity to advance seniors' human rights and efforts to support seniors around the world. Canada is a global leader in supporting seniors with a robust pension plan and universal healthcare system, and we look forward to sharing our experience and work collaboratively to improve the lives of seniors both here and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, Prince Rupert is home to one of North America's fastest growing ports, but the city of Prince Rupert is struggling to maintain the basic infrastructure needed for a growing workforce. In December, the city declared a local state of emergency after several water main breaks, and now city officials fear the catastrophic failure of the city's water infrastructure. Now, the BC government has pledged support already, and it's written to this Minister of Infrastructure and asked for federal help. Why won't this Liberal government step up and help this city in crisis?
The Honourable Minister for Interparliamentary Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our honourable colleague for raising that important question. He and I have had a number of productive conversations about this important project. Officials of my department have spoken with the city as well. We understand that his point is very accurate. This is a critical piece of Canada's economic infrastructure, and yet a municipal water system is dependent on a community with a population that is necessarily much more limited than the economic impact of the larger port and its infrastructure. I've had conversations with the government of British Columbia in this regard, and we hope to have good news soon.
Honourable Member for North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, for decades, women in the RCMP suffered a shocking amount of sexual harassment and discrimination. Now Veterans Affairs is clawing back their disability pensions. Months ago, following the Merlo-Davidson lawsuit, the Ombuds recommended the clawbacks stop. But the minister has done nothing. He is making these women who served their country suffer all over again. When will he fix this and make this right?
The Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my honourable colleague's concern, and I also appreciate the Ombudsman and her office for providing recommendations to the government. The women who came forward and disclosed their experience in the Merlo-Davidson did so with incredible courage. We will have more to say on the recommendations made by the Ombuds shortly, and thank her on behalf of the veterans and their families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. C'est tout le temps que nous avons. It being 3:20 p.m., pursuant to order made on Monday, March 6, 2023, this House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 2 p.m., pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.
Forget Cambodia. Holiday in Canada. Trudeau. We've investigated and found I did nothing wrong, and the elections were free and fair. Yea, if you compare Pol Pot's Cambodia to Canada, perhaps. The latest in the Globe has given me a wonderful morning with Fife Da Knife leading the charge. Now they have a source providing damning evidence of the Trudeau Foundation. But of course, we all knew this would happen the day the foundation was set up. You think the workings of an arms dealer are shady? Puffed! Look at the murky world of pay-to-play politics. With enough cash, you get dinner and a pick, as seen with the three Conservatives taking pics with Hale Anderson.
There seemed to be a cultural shift. The currency of
an ecosystem of resources, networks, skills, etc. Our ambition is that each startup, wherever it is in Quebec, can access the best resources available to support its growth. In addition to helping our ecosystem, we deploy several support projects across Quebec. And this is done in partnership with a growing number of incubators and other support organizations, as well as coaches, experts, and other consultants. We also weave strategic alliances with other national entrepreneurship organizations because we also believe that for Canadians to be involved in startups, we need to have more entrepreneurs, period. And as a trustee for the Quebec ecosystem and one of the 5 recipients of the Government of Canada's Raise IP program, we are very proud. Now, before I go any farther, I'd like to take a few moments to really define what a startup is. The simplest definition of a startup is an innovative company with high growth potential. And we often use the word jeune pousse or young shoot in French. What distinguishes a startup from a more traditional one is that it relies on innovation in services, products, or even a business model. And it focuses on those innovations in order to break into a market with huge potential. Now, most of the time, entrepreneurs who are involved in startups will expend a great deal of effort and capital before they achieve any revenues. It often takes many years of investments and funding before any money is made, and oftentimes first sales are made at a loss. And this is because it's important to scale the company up. And that's the way it will perhaps become profitable. And in this ecosystem, there are expectations that many companies will never become profitable. That's simply part of the equation. and so they won't make it across what we refer to as the valley of death. A startup is a unique vehicle. It's a unique approach that is located at the crossroads between innovation and entrepreneurship, between research and action, and each one is a gamble. Collectively, by betting on startups, we accept that we may not win all of our bets, but we look to win the big ones. And while there are many factors that come into play, timing, market access, the situation, some luck, the geopolitical situation, the socioeconomic situation, health considerations, there are some levers that will make it possible to increase the ability to succeed. Intellectual property is one of them. In Canada, we are excellent inventors, but we're not as good at commercializing those innovations. We can't claim to understand all the reasons for this gap, but we do hear that companies see IP protection as a cumbersome and costly administrative process with little return in the short term. Another reason that could explain this is the difficulties in having access to organizations, public institutions. Valorization companies like Axels in Quebec are working hard, but the fact remains that the process for licensing IP developed in a public institution is tedious, expensive, frustrating, and it often leads to dead ends. But there are also some positive aspects. Let's look at the bright side. Canada is ranked highly when it comes to patents, even though my colleague has shown in recent years that that may not be the case. But as we know, just having a lot of pairs of running shoes doesn't make a person a good runner. And it's not just about patents, it's about having market access as well. Now, Canada has worked hard in the past few years at improving commercialization of our innovations. Look at Axelis in Quebec, or the launching of the Quebec Innovation Research and Investment Strategy. There's also action taken by the federal government through the Strategic Innovation Fund. The Strategic Innovation Fund has the IP Explorer portal, the Raise IP, and other things.
For a minute, over the 5-minute mark here. So going on to our first round of questions, it'll be the 6-minute round. And to kick us off, we have MP Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to start off by thanking the committee for agreeing to undertake this study. I think it's very pertinent right now. It's very important to Canada. Number one, we talk about IP commercialization. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about good-paying jobs. We're talking about wealth. And there's another side where we're even looking at national security and protecting what is Canada's knowledge, the currency of innovation, as Monsieur Bennett noted. Even today in today's Globe and Mail, as reported, and a good comment by Senator Colin Deacon, who noted that over the past 20 years, the portion of Canadian invented patents transferred to foreign firms has tripled from 18% to more than 50%. So I think today it's very pertinent to start this study, and I think I think the whole committee, I can speak on behalf, hopefully, of most of the committee, we're looking forward to the recommendations to ensure that Canada is capitalizing on IP. So to both of you gentlemen, I'm going to start with both you, Mr. McLean and Monsieur Bennett. Based on the work of your organizations, what is the single biggest roadblock to SMEs trying to commercialize their IP? And in your opinion, how do we fix it?
To me, the largest roadblock is lack of understanding of IP strategy and the approach to capture and commercialize IP. Canadian companies do not have access to role models. They don't have access to peers that understand these issues. Our economy has been dominated by resource companies and financial institutions for a long time. And until recently, those businesses have not needed to build strong IP positions in order to succeed. Our technology and knowledge-based companies, though, really do. And they don't have access to the right talent sets, the right peer groups, the right networks in order to build those capacities and understandings with those businesses. So we need to build institutions that can help drive that change and help build role models and help build successful companies that then can spawn others.
if I can complement, because I agree with Mr. McLean's comments, if I can complement from the point of view of startups, most early stage companies, let's say pre-launch, are cash strapped. They evolve there's less loose cash in Canada than there are in other markets. So the difficulty of protecting IP, of going to market, will lead startup entrepreneurs to make decisions that are based on very little available cash in the early stages of companies, which is a disadvantage compared to how startups in other ecosystems might have more access to early funding before their launch phase, their seed phase.
So, Mr. Bennett, one stat we look at, we compare ourselves to the United States. The United States are probably one of the best in the world for IP generation, the United States and China. U.S. In 2019 had 169 times the IP generation that Canada did. So we did about $39 million. They had almost $6.6 trillion. What is the U.S. doing that we aren't, in your experience?
From what I can see is that someone out of a U.S. university, some U.S. universities will say, can come up with an idea, some little research that they did and they found in a lab, and say, I could turn that into a company if I had the money. And based on that, they can raise $1 million, no questions asked, and start exploring how they can turn that knowledge, take it out of the university, and turn it into a company. You can't do that here. It will happen, but it will be on an exceptional basis. And that, for me, is a real difference. That is a real difference, because it's that first $1 million is how you explore the fit between the knowledge and an eventual market.
So how is venture capital in Quebec compared to, say, the U.S.? And maybe you can comment on Quebec or maybe in Canada, or venture capital environment or infrastructure? Well,
venture capital is the same from coast to coast to coast. Venture capital in Canada will come in once you have a product and you've started commercializations and you've already shown that the market will buy your product. And so venture capital starts at the seed phase, pre-seed funding, very rare, and there is very little what we call friends, family, and fools money. So people who are willing to invest very early on based on an idea. Of course, the risk is greater, but that's why we call it capital de risque, or venture capital. But the way venture capital is structured in Canada, mostly with a lot of partners in the funds handling institutional money, the ability or the willingness to take a lot of risk and to move pre-seed there's some obstacles to that.
Do you think Canadians are able to invest or take risk the same as Americans?
That I was looking forward to the conclusion of the government's review.
Welcome our witnesses today. From the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada.
The Information Commissioner. Carolyn, welcome to the committee. I know that there's a lot of interest in this particular issue among committee members, and we're really looking forward to having a discussion with you today. So you have 5 minutes. Please start.
Thank you. Donc, j'aimerais tout d'abord
I would like to start by thanking you for inviting me yet again to appear before this committee in the context of your ongoing study of the Access to Information and Privacy System.
Before this committee, I noted that I was looking forward to the conclusion of the government's review of the Access to Information regime, which was launched in the summer of 2020. Last December, the government finally released the final report of its review. After such a long wait, What I read was honestly disappointing. I posted a statement expressing my dissatisfaction with the government's report on my office's website. In my view, this report is deficient across the board. But in the interest of time, I will limit my focus to a couple of key points. Je me réjouis du fait que le gouvernement
I am pleased that the government took note of the concerns I had raised regarding lengthy consultations between institutions, as well as the lack of a declassification framework and the resulting negative impacts these have had on the access regime. However, I find it unfortunate that there are no proposals for concrete actions to go with the government's analysis.
I find a few, if any, tangible commitments within the report's pages that will begin to effect change now in areas that require immediate attention. More importantly, it appears that the government has decided that no further modifications to the law are to be made, at least not in a near term. When the 2019 amendments were introduced, I noted that these represented a step in the right direction, but that more changes would be required. Many legislative changes that have been proposed by experts in their submissions to the review merit your committee's careful consideration. These include recommendations to broaden the scope of the Access to Information Act to cover ministers' offices as well as the Prime Minister's office, make cabinet confidence subject to the Act, and reduce the scope of some exemptions, including Section 21 on advice and recommendations. Par ailleurs, je doute que le renforcement.
I also have no confidence that bolstering Canadians' right to access to information will figure prominently in the government's financial priorities. I have heard nothing regarding my request for additional funding from the government, and that speaks volumes.
I strongly believe that a model that gives the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister the power to limit the required funding of agents of Parliament is contrary to our oversight role. As agents of Parliament, we report directly to Parliament rather than to a cabinet or a particular minister. Frankly, the manner in which we are funded should reflect this independence. My priority has always been to tackle our inventory, and I have been able to significantly increase my office's efficiency since I became commissioner, as shown in the reference document that I submitted to this committee. But we have reached the limit of what we can do with the budget provided. The government may have turned the page on access to information, but I have not, which is why I look forward to the results of this committee's study. In closing, this coming summer, July 2023, marks the 40th anniversary of the Access to Information Act. On the eve of this milestone, I unfortunately see little to celebrate. Le Canada a encore beaucoup à faire.
Much remains to be done for Canada to catch up with international standards on access and transparency, and to tackle the enormous challenges faced by the system. This concludes my opening remarks, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard.
We're going to start with the questioning. We are going till roughly around 5 o'clock with this. First round of questioning is to Mr. Keurig. You have 6 minutes, Mr. Keurig.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming before the committee. And I would just note the stark difference in your remarks today versus the last time when you were anticipating this report and review being released, and to hear words like regrettable and disappointed and some of the very, very strong language that you've used to describe the lack of where the government is coming from. And just to note before I get into my specific questions, rarely on an issue does there seem to be universal agreement, as was the case with every witness that came before this committee, that said two things. One, was that that a good access to information system is vital for a strong democracy, and second, that Canada did not match up with where it needed to be. You noted in your opening remarks some of the areas that were lacking, and specifically, you noted and you said you have no confidence that the government is going to give the fiscal arrangements required for this to be addressed. I want to give you an opportunity to expand on that a little bit more, especially as we're coming up into what we anticipate the federal budget. Can you expand on why you have no confidence in that? And in light of close to a 50-page report, you've noted that you have no confidence that the government will address these stark concerns.
Well, the report itself speaks, I think, for itself. It's a good summary of all the issues that we're facing in the access system, issues that we've known for years, issues that you've heard from experts, issues that I've mentioned in my submissions. We knew them before 2019 when Bill C-58 was tabled. So what's disappointing is there's no action plan. There's a lot of there's a lot of opportunities, and I think the opportunity has been missed. You've heard from submission for 2 years, public consultations were taken. Where are the recommendations? Usually a legislative review, you will have conclusions, recommendations, and a plan of action. And this is why I am disappointed today to speak in front of you because of this report. Secondly, there's no mention of access to information in any of the mandate of the minister's letters. So I don't think transparency and access is key at this point. I have asked for additional funding from my office, which I think all the access units should also get. The resources are lacking, and we're not seeing much going towards that either. So this is why I think that this is not not something to celebrate.
So Commissioner, I'd like to get some of your feelings as to some of those what possible concrete actions could be. But in about the 2.5 minutes that I have here, I'd first like to ask specifically, there seems to be, the government seems to continue to defend C-58, and yet we hear often how that has not improved the system. So in about 30 seconds or so, could you just expand on why C-58 seems to be a continuing challenge to improving Canada's access to information system?
Well, C-58 gave me the power to order institutions to issue disclosure and to meet some deadlines. Unfortunately, my orders are being sometimes ignored. I don't have a certification process to obtain my order, to go to the federal court to make sure that these orders are seen as having the power of an order from a court. It is still better than recommendation, I can tell you that. But what we need is better training, more retention, the people who are doing this. We need to have better analysts, and we need to have an act that is modernized. The act was tabled or submitted in 40 years ago, and it has not been changed much. Apart from my ordering power, the exemptions, the exclusions have not been reviewed. There's lots to be done also within the system. The report talks about information management, the classification program. Those are huge issues within our government, but there doesn't seem to be concrete actions of how to tackle these issues.
So I want to jump on something you just said. We're used to the government ignoring what opposition parties will say and things like that. But to hear from you that your orders are being ignored, that's something. So I'd like to, in about the 30 seconds that I have left in this round, can you expand on a little bit about what that being ignored is in regards to? If you can provide any examples, anything else that you'd like to share to this committee and Canadians.
So the order is, you have two choices when there's an order being issued by my office. You accept it and comply with it, or you can go to court to challenge it. So what we've seen and what I have asked is to have a mechanism to make sure that people would not just ignore the orders. It doesn't happen that often, but what we're seeing now is a trend of institutions who are not saying that they're going to challenge it, but they're just taking more time to actually comply with my orders. And there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keurig. Madame Menard. Mr. Baines, you have 6 minutes. You're first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Commissioner, for joining us today. Several witnesses indicated the need to declassify documents. I think you just mentioned what declassification standards do Canada's peers use that this committee should examine further?
We issued a report a couple of years ago on declassification, and I can send you a copy. It's actually giving you a great summary of what the UK is doing and the United States are doing. But they both have a program where within 20 to 30 years of a document being produced, there's a declassification program where they review those documents, and if they declassify it, that means that it's a lot easier for people to access it. They don't have to wait until somebody is asking through an access request. This would give historian and library and archive and people who are looking into the history of Canada, especially for national security documents, access to documents way faster, easier than having to wait for my office to do an investigation.
Okay, and the review concluded that an enhanced whole-of-government ATI workforce strategy could assist with resourcing challenges faced by ATIP offices. What would effective skills training and staff retention in the ATI community look like to you?
Well, when we're talking about ATI, it's people actually responding to requests. So you have people who have to have, it's almost like great people skills, because you're dealing with requesters that want the information now, and then you're dealing with the institutions who have people who don't want to provide the information right away, or having some issues with information management. We need people who can negotiate, can discuss, can read the Act and apply the Act to the documents. There's definitely training that needs to be done. That's the government's responsibility. That's administrating the Act. But I can tell you it's a difficult job, and it's something that we need to create almost a profession of analysts for that type of position.
And is the new ATI community development, is it making headway on these?
You would have to ask Minister Fortier, because that's one of our activities from the Treasury Board. It's them who created that.
The government recently updated its ATIP online request service, which was launched in 2018 to allow Canadians an easier way to make requests, and through the Information Act and Privacy Act. Are these types of technological improvements to the ATI system a benefit to Canadians?
For sure, yeah. The online request form is always easier than having to deal with each institution, and now there's one portal where people can go through and ask for the information.
I think you gave us some data on that last time, like how much improvement.
It's the problem. It's with respect to access requests, and I'm dealing with complaints at my office. So Minister Fortier again would be the perfect person to ask that question.
Okay, and one of our previous witnesses, Mr. Drapeau, suggested changes to the Information Commissioner to help speed up the process of ATI, specifically to introduce a 1-year period before complaints can be brought before a federal court. What are your thoughts on that analysis?
I would love to be able to do all my investigation within a year, and I provided you with my inventory. You'll see some of those files are complex. They deal with secret information or very complex information. What I'm worried about, if somebody has to go to court, they won't be able to represent themselves. We see the documents, so we can challenge an institution on what we see in our files, where a requester has the file that they have redacted. Going to court, you would have to have these complainants represent themselves, not subject to the review of an independent commissioner, and not having that opinion of an independent commissioner helping them deal with their file.
Okay, and in a letter you sent to the Speaker, you wrote that some misconceptions regarding the functioning of access to information system and the operations of my office have arisen during these hearings. What are those misconceptions?
Well, I think one of them is I understand the timelines that it takes in my office. I've given you the inventory. We receive every year more files than we can absorb. And unfortunately, at one point, we have to decide what we're going to be tackling. So at this point, we're tackling the old files at the same time as we're trying to reduce the inventory of new files. But when we are funded for 4,000 cases a year, and that's what's the issue. At one point, we're getting so more efficient with what we're doing, the templates and the training that we're giving to our analysts, a development program, but the files are coming in faster than we can conclude them. So we need more resources.
More time? Okay. Last question here. Fees. My home province of British Columbia has introduced a $10 fee to discourage, vexatious requests and fund the system. Do you agree or disagree with that implementation?
Commissioner McAvoy just tabled a report on that, and you will see that 80% of requests have reduced because of that fee. It's only $5 more than in Canada at the federal level, but it had a huge impact on access requests. And that's something that the government has to decide whether that's the proper way, but I can tell you that usually access should be free. This is how our Canadians are getting the information. It's a part of our democracy.
So
I think it speaks for itself.
Valid complaints could just go missing, basically, not come through, right? With that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baines, Ms. Menard, Monsieur Villemure.
Mr. Villemure, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for being with us yet again. I listened to your opening remarks, and you are disappointed. Would you say that the current government has a culture of access to information? Or would you say that it's the opposite, rather, that it doesn't have a culture of openness? Answer: it's been hard to change the culture with access to information. It's easier to hide information or withhold information than to share it. There are some departments that do things better than others, but there is still this culture of trying to have exemptions and exclusions instead of thinking of what information can be shared. So the culture of information sharing hasn't improved. No. Do you have any hope? Have you seen any will to improve things? Answer: it depends on the ministers and the deputy ministers and the directors. In some departments, when managers ask a lot of questions on access to information, for some of them it's a priority and we can see the difference. But it's very specific to each institution. So I can't say that it is throughout the government. In the Foreign Affairs magazine, they talked about the United States, and it stated that public servants were trained to keep secrets instead of responding positively, and they would rather classify something as secret. Is that the same case here? Yes. You mentioned earlier that with your current budget, it is very difficult to deal with the increase in requests. Do you think that your budget should be determined by an independent institution or a different institution, for example? Answer: I think that my budget, yes, but also for the Auditor General, I think that our budget should be talked about during a parliamentary committee or a special committee that could make a recommendation. And so that would allow us to stay independent. I think that's what's done in other countries like Australia, for example. I couldn't tell you, but there are agents of Parliament that have independent mechanisms, for example, the Integrity Commissioner or the Director of, or the Chief Electoral Officer, for example. So it's not something new in that case. No.
in a lot of these cases we hear exceptions for national security, but it seems like these criteria are not very clear. Do you think that they could be improved? I think that your experts could tell you this. For people who use that exemption, for us, when we test things, it's clear for our analysts, but it's something that we do frequently. But what we've noticed is that in institutions, the analysts change. People don't have that experience. So as you stated earlier, as soon as they see a confidential, secret, or top secret document, the analyst will think that that security level of that document means that the information should not be shared or should be hidden. Whereas the test goes beyond that to see whether or not this will have a negative impact. That's why with documents over time lose that, and that's why we need people to go through these documents after a certain number of years and declassify the documents that are already overclassified. It seems that sometimes there are too many classified documents for national security, and then a review is not done, so they stay classified. Tell me, a registry for access to information requests, would that be a way to make the process faster if people were more aware of what was going on or more aware of the issues of your budget? Currently, when institutions receive access to information requests, they need to keep a list of all access to information requests received over 2 years. And we've noticed that not all institutions respect that. But it does help because people can go through the list and try to request access that request information that was already shared. But having proactive disclosure beyond what is required in legislation is something that we encourage. That's something that I say every time I meet with a minister or a deputy minister. Briefing notes, for example, they could be proactively put on a website. Have you seen any positive changes for that? Answer, again, for certain institutions, yes, but not everywhere. For example, IRCC or ICMP, are they champions in access to information? You can see in my inventory that, unfortunately, even with IRCC, the requests have not decreased, and the action plan that was announced 3 years ago has yet to be implemented. So they're still receiving a lot of ATIP requests, and we've been receiving a lot of complaints. I'm not sure how long it's going to take them to implement these changes, but it will have a positive impact to access to information in Canada if these changes are implemented. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Matt, Mr. Green, you've got 6 minutes.
I wouldn't begin by saying that to the Commissioner Maynard, you're in good company. When the Cabinet refuses to hand over information, I'll share with you that as members of Parliament, constitutionally consider the grand inquest of the nation, even with our own parliamentary privileges and very well-established common law in that regard, they too stonewall us when it comes to basic information. We seem to be in a culture where all of a sudden everything is Cabinet confidence and everything is client-solicitor privilege when they're both the client and the solicitor. So as the Information Commissioner, you don't have the authority to access records that contain Cabinet confidences that the head of an institution has refused to disclose. And jurisdiction over Part 2 of the Access to Information Act, published decisions made in regard to the applications. You'd mentioned they can decline the access requests. And as a result, you've put forth recommendations addressing these and further limitations to your power as Commissioner. Can you expand on how these limitations to your powers impact your ability to ensure that the access regime is effective in delivering its mandate?
Access to information is the basic for Canadians' trust. If Canadians don't trust that they can obtain the information that they're entitled to, it ultimately results in a lack of trust in this government and our institutions. And if you don't have access to, or if I don't have access to documents that nobody can review, like cabinet confidence, how am I supposed to make sure that our Canadians are trusting that these are actually cabinet confidence? Nobody currently has in Canada the authority to review cabinet confidence. I'm not saying that we need to disclose them. I believe in the secrecy of discussions and cabinet. That's something that you know government can discuss, but it's something that we need to just look at the Commissioner Rouleau's commission on the Emergency Act. He was giving access to a lot of documents that normally he would not have, to be able to tell Canadians the decision, you know, and to review that decision and to make a determination on that.
I will interject at that point. I'm co-chairing the Emergency Act Review Committee on the parliamentary side. And the same requests for information that is, you know, the supreme law of the land, the House of Commons, the supremacy of our parliamentary privilege was completely ignored by this government, refused to hand over documents to a committee when we have the supreme ability to send for documents and evidence. And it is a cultural issue. And I would agree with my friend from the block. And in your report titled, or in the report titled Observations and Recommendations from the Information Commissioner on the Government of Canada's Review, you stated that this is not just like a need for a cultural shift towards more openness, but in fact, this is a culture of complacency. And the downplaying or tolerance of delays must end. So first of all, I want to say that you being before us here as an independent officer and commissioner of this House is an integral part to our democracy and one that we should be supporting more fully. So what would you recommend to bring about a cultural shift within the government to address that very serious issue?
There's so many things that needs to be done. It's hard to start with, but yeah, the submissions have provided good examples of where things needs to be better. Our government needs to provide clear direction to all institutions that they must respect the Act. Even if you don't change the Act, if we were to respect the 30-day that's in there, if we were to make sure that public servants know that that's part of their function, they have to be able to help their analysts when they receive access requests. The 30-day has been ignored. Extensions have been are being asked more and more. They don't have the resources to respond to access requests. Information management needs to change. There's so many places.
Part of it, if I recall, you also stated that the access regime experiences difficulties due to the lack of qualified staff to deal with the requests and an institution's use of these archaic methods for processing, right? Like I joked when I first got in here, we were talking about boxes in the bottom, like not even having things digitized on PDF and so on and so forth. So can you perhaps describe a little bit when it comes to the processing, management, and sending of information, what these methods look like and how they create additional difficulties for the access regime? Because in my observation, this is a government that had not too long ago a minister for digital government that just disappeared off the face of the planet unceremoniously, probably at the same time the mandate letter point dropped. So can you just talk a little bit about why, having that type of whole of government approach, like they like to talk about all the time, might provide better supports for the work that you do?
We definitely need more technology to help. We definitely need to look at information management. It's nowadays people work with emails, and I said that last time I appeared before you, we have examples of requests that should result in 2 or 3 pages of information, resulting to 500 to 1,000 pages of information because people are not taking care of and properly managing their information. Just recently, one of my own access unit was consulting another institutions on 2 pages, and we were asked for 90-day extension for them to respond. Consultations is a huge problem within institutions. We need to have clear indication, clear guidance that consultations are not mandatory. They are good to have, but not at this point. When you don't have time, you don't consult. You make your own decisions on the document in front of you. And that's what my unit is going to do.
Thank you, Madam Menard. Mr. Kirk, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's interesting. There was a statement made earlier today that I'll repeat here, and it's secrecy by burying it in process seems to be a common trend here. So Commissioner, you expressed concern by saying that you sincerely hope that this does not signal that the government has reached the limits of its willingness to improve the legislative framework. Can you expand on what you mean by that statement?
The report that was tabled contains a lot of comments and findings about exemptions and exclusions that are not consistently applied and maybe understood properly, but it doesn't seem to have any recommendations to change the wording of these exemptions or to review the extensions of these exemptions, but rather to provide more guidance through policies and manuals, and we already have those. I think it's time to look at each exemptions, each exclusions, and decide, do we want the Section 21 on advice and recommendations to be for 20 years? Do we want cabinet confidence to still be prohibited, from my review? Do we want to put a timeline for consultations in the Act so that we don't rely on a policy to institutions about that? The Act is 40 years old. I think it's time to look at each section like a real legislative review would have done. I didn't see that in that report. That's what I expected.
Okay. Thank you for that. And Commissioner, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about outside or third-party contractors. I've heard this. There's been a lot of anecdotal evidence suggested. The government has suggested some of that's not true. There's some questions about information on the estimates about what that looks like. Does the seemingly large expansion of third-party contractors, outside contractors used by ATIP divisions, does that concern you? And if so, can you expand on those concerns a little bit?
I think the problem is it's really difficult to recruit people who have the knowledge and who are willing to, like I said earlier, to do that job. It's definitely if an institutions, and I feel for them, I'm telling you, like it's one of those tough jobs, and when they can't find people who wants to come and do the job, they have to rely on consultants. And I had to do that too at one point, but now what we're doing is we have a rotation and we're bringing in people from the from outside the government, trying to train them and keep them. But it's a very difficult job, and I'm not surprised that the consultants are being used more and more, because I'm told by some institutions we have the money, we just can't find the people.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I've heard from some within ATIP divisions, past and current individuals that say that it is a nightmare to work for the access to information divisions. There's a whole host of challenges associated with that. One of the comments that was made to me that I would pose to you in the form of a question is performance metrics. That there is a lack of performance metrics for ATIP officers within departments, and that seems to be a trend that is plaguing all aspects of this entire regime. I'm wondering if, in about the minute that I have left, if you have any suggestions for how we could deal with the seemingly incredibly poor performance, and if there is a matrix or mechanism that could be used to start ensuring that we actually get some results here.
I think you need to provide, people have to have performance indicator at the management level, at the DG, ADM, DM level. That's where you need them to be responsible. That's the minister is accountable for access. The obligation under the Act is to the head of the institution. They need to be interested in what's going on in their unit. And that's why I'm sending the orders directly to the minister's office now, so that they know when they're late in 25 files, so that their unit is struggling. It's not the poor little analyst that needs to be giving, objectives. Like, yeah, they have objectives. They have to close them in, that many files. But the director, the DG, they have to have performance evaluation and bonuses according to, for what they need to be responsible for access to information. Right now, I don't think it's taken that seriously.
Which highlights some of the larger challenges that exist currently within government, as there doesn't seem to be that top-down accountability, and it goes right to the top. Okay. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Carrick. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Hepner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I would like to thank Commissioner Maynard for being back again before us, answering our questions. It's nice to see you again here. And I would like to start with part 1 of your observations and recommendations on the Access to Information Review. You noted that systemic problems require just as much attention as the legislative review. So I'm hoping you can opine on whether increasing the scope of the Act will take away from addressing some of the capacity issues that your office faces.
No. It's going to increase the number of requests, that's for sure. But the question is not what we're going to take away from the Canadians. The Act has to be reviewed as much as the system has to be addressed. If you're going to give more information through access requests, clearly you need to have more people working in access units. If you're providing more information through portals like the IRCC, you will take those 200 analysts that they're now hiring to do access requests, and they will be available for other units. What we need to give Canadians is what we have to look at, what they're looking for as for information. Is the information that we're giving them is it what they're looking for? And there's a lot of information out there that our Canadians are not entitled to get. Information in offices of the ministers, third-party institutions, providers, contractors. That's a lot of information that I think the scope of the Act has to be increased.
In the same vein, then, can you comment on the maximum length of time for the government to conduct its internal consultations and respond to access requests and review? I think you were critical that the government doesn't make a firm commitment on timelines. Do you think that would exacerbate delays as well? I mean, the system is already sort of buckling under so much pressure.
So right now, the Act says that you have to respond to an access request in 30 days, or you can ask for an extension if you have to, if there's different reason. One of them is consultations. Consultations are not mandatory. They're, and I think at this point, a lot of institutions think they are, or they're treating it like it is, because it's information that they're sharing with another institution, so they want to make sure they're not providing that information without their consultation. But what we see is often, if you have 20 pages to be consulted, they don't pinpoint what they're looking for. They don't pinpoint the recommendation they want to answer on. And the poor unit who's responding to the consultation request has another pile of requests that they have to go through. So they don't treat these consultation requests as a priority as well. So the consultations either have to be in the legislation. What I propose is to put specific timelines. After 30 days, you're out, you know, because right now we don't have that. So we have, like, my office was told 90 days for a consultation on 2 pages.
I remember you talking about this last time you were here, that one way to improve this government documentation would be to have, for example, parliamentarians deleting the emails with no corporate value, just recording meeting minutes. You said you don't have to keep all your emails about everything. Is that still your position? Can you sort of explain to us how we can be better at managing information?
Well, everybody in the government needs to be better at the management, for sure. What we see is people, they don't have volume maximum of emails, like a capacity anymore. Most of the institutions, they have this big size of inboxes that nobody takes care of it. So when you are being asked for emails, you can produce 10,000 of them. What we're saying is you need to have a proper management of information within those inboxes so that one person keeps the emails, whether it's the recipient, so usually it would be the person receiving the signature or of something and then properly documented it. We don't have access if we don't have documents. That's clear. You don't want to erase business value documents, but you can definitely get rid of the transitory ones, the personal emails, which we still see through, inboxes. There's definitely some learning to be done there.
Okay. I only have 20 seconds left, so I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hepner. Monsieur Villemure, vous avez deux.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Maynard, I'd like to come back to what we were talking about earlier. Do you think that there's a need for training in the different departments and organizations so that they understand what access to information is? Answer, yes. And even though my legislation doesn't give me the mandate to offer training as the other commissioners, but I think that we as commissioners should inform people on how they can help us, how we can help them. We do offer such things at my office, but I'm not invited as often as I would like by institutions that would need our help. I spoke with 5,000 employees from the CRA recently, and I think it was greatly appreciated. If you don't work in a unit that focuses on ATIP and you've never examined that, you wouldn't understand your role as a public servant. You wouldn't know what information to keep, how to manage it, and why that information is important to Canadians. Do you believe that it's up to Treasury Board to offer such training or to require such training? Answer, I think that it is a part of their function, and I think that public servants need to be interested in it. Currently, it's not mandatory for new public servants. In the little time that I have left, we talked about declassification. Do you have a proposal for declassification? No. There are different methods and different programs. For example, the United States, they have methods in place, and so Canada could go see what is happening in the United States and in the UK. There are experts in Canada who have examined both models, and things have been written on both of these models. Even if it's 50 years and then you declassify something, I think that it would be a good start. So training and declassifying, this should be up to Treasury Board and our government, yes. Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
2.5 minutes.
I'm going to ask some questions in a rather rapid fire way, and so I'm going to try to get you to answer them as quickly as you can so I can get through and have on the record as many as possible. You stated that the government has to invest in hiring qualified staff, develop ongoing training and new technology. Have you received any explanation for why the government is hesitant to adequately fund the ATIP regime?
No.
If, in your opinion, why do you think they're hesitant to do so?
I just think financial, situation, everybody's struggling. We're all asking for more money. Clearly, this is not a priority.
Okay. Can you describe why the creation of a statutory duty for public servants and senior staff to create a registry of key actions and decisions is necessary?
It's necessary because we currently don't have in the Act, the access only exists if the record exists.
In 2018 and 2019, extensions to consult accounted for 48% of all time extensions. Given that consultations with other institutions are not mandatory, do you believe that institutions may be using consultations as a method to delay their response to access requests?
In some cases, definitely.
So in addition to imposing limits for responding to consultations, are there any other limitations to consultations that should be considered?
I think that consultation should be only, there should be a clear setup of reasons why consultations must be taken or not.
Can you describe why it's important that agencies to whom the government has outsourced the delivery of government programs and services should be subject to Part 1 of the Act?
These organizations are providing the public, the Canadian services on behalf of Canada. They're using public funds to provide those services. Canadians are asking for information about where the money is going, how the decisions are made. these institutions should be subject to the Act. Yes.
We just spent quite a lot of time studying McKinsey, and so, understanding that, can you describe this increasing amount of government programs and services that are transferred to private sector agencies? Is it a fair statement that Canadians' access to information will continue to decrease without an intervention that would include them in Part 1 of the Act?
We need specific institutions, to be in the Act.
Okay, that was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. My favorite movie is Uncle Buck, and especially that part where they ask the questions, Macaulay Culkin's, why do you do that? Because I'm a kid. It's my job. Thank you for that. Mr. Barrett, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. At the Standing Committee on Government Operations, there was an exchange between the Chair and the Comptroller General that was widely reported on, and it revealed that the Comptroller General was caught directing colleagues to be careful what they write down so that it's not captured in emails and then subjected to ATIPs. What do you think about that? Well, first, ma'am, are you familiar with the scenario that I'm referring to? Okay. And what's your reaction to that?
I issued a statement on what I heard. I cannot comment specifically because I will admit that I'm doing an investigation on that issue. But generally, what I can tell you is, like I said earlier, access does not exist if there's no documents. And we need leaders to encourage documents creating so that our Canadians are entitled to get that information when they request it.
Right, and so it would be fair that your guidance would be the opposite of something like that. Someone saying not to write things down, but if there were an oral conversation to take place, that it be minuted and that document be retained. Is that the type of document creation that you're referring to?
My advice to institution is that they need to be clearer on taking minutes, making decisions, properly documenting, and actually Commissioner Rouleau mentioned that too in his report, is that when decisions that are important are being taken fast, people forget sometimes to go back and write down what was discussed, and we need that. We need public servants who know that that's part of their job.
You've expressed, in your words, great disappointment that the Liberal government didn't put forward concrete solutions to issues that Canadians face with access to information. Why do you think that they didn't put those solutions forward?
I can't, I don't know. You could ask, I think, the government, but I think what they've done is a really good summary of all the issues that we know exist in the system. What we don't know now is how they intend to tackle those issues.
What does it signal, in your opinion, or what would it signal, in your opinion, to Canadians if the government had exhausted its willingness to improve and build out the legislative framework around access to information? What is the message that would send to Canadians if that were the case?
It means that our act is going to be considered one of the worst legislation in access to information when you look at other jurisdiction in terms of access. I said it earlier, our act is 40 years old. It was created when we were dealing with paper, and now we're in a digital world, and we need to have an access to information act that's modernized up to 2023.
In the absence of an act that's modernized up to 2023, in a situation where we see the delays of returns from requests for access to information, does that harm Canadians' confidence in their institutions. Does that have a harmful effect, or is it just a neutral effect? You know, there's so would you say that it's harmful?
I think it is. Like we can see that our Canadians saying that they are lacking trust, and I think it is our job to make sure that that trust increases in our institutions, in our government. And one of those, the solution is to provide them with information in a timely manner. Just respecting the act that we have currently would be a great advantage, but we are having a difficulty doing that.
Well, thank you very much, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Barrett. We're going to go back to Ms. Hubner.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again to the Commissioner. You've been talking about the lack of resources in your office, and I just want to point out that public accounts show that in 2015, your office got just under $10.5 million, and in 2022, it was just over $16 million, about a 54% increase. Can you talk about what those extra funds do for you, how much more you could use to really be effective, and the difference in the amounts of money over time?
So when I arrived, I cannot talk about 2015. Unfortunately, I was there in 2018. We were asking for additional fundings because of the amount of complaints that were received by my office. Every year we get an increase, 25% minimum. In the 5 years that I've been commissioner, the complaints have increased by 180%. Unfortunately, we can't foresee the future. So every time we ask for additional funding, we think we can have enough, and then the next year we have more complaints. We definitely use these funds to hire investigators. I've got 75% of my funding going to investigations, how to support them and to complete them. Right now, like I said earlier, I'm funded to close 4,000 cases approximately. We are able to do 7,000. We have increased our efficiency, and I have to say working from home for us has been a great advantage because our people are way more efficient when they don't have all the distraction from you know, the noise in it. But that aside, I think if we continue to receive more complaints, we cannot attack the inventory. My inventory is kind of like always staying at around 3,500, 4,000 cases. I'm closing 7,000, but I'm receiving 7,000. So I would like to have at least temporary funding to be able to get additional investigators so that we can get rid of that, you know, those files that are stuck in the inventory. But that aside, I also want to say, even if I get more money for more investigators, I said it earlier, the units, the institutions are not able to respond to my investigators. They don't have the resources either. And they have to decide whether they're going to respond to me in my complaints investigation process or respond to the request that's waiting on their desk as well. So more money to me is not sufficient. We need to invest in the entire system.
And so it seems to me one of the factors that would help alleviate some of that pressure is more proactive disclosure by the government. And one thing that this government did through the Open Government Portal is include a suggest a data set function. So users can request information that they would like to see released. Could you explain to us, you know, is that a good addition, and what other things would you do to improve the portal for users?
Access requests should be the last resort to obtain the information. The information should be accessible. It should be accessible through proactive disclosure. It should be accessible through portal. I've given the example before, CRA, you have your own account. Imagine if you had to ask through an access request information about your taxes, you don't have to because you have a portal where you can go and ask for see your information. IRCC is a great example. If they were provided their information through a portal, we would see 200,000 requests less a year in this government. And I would see 3,000 complaints less in my office probably as well. So I think there's a lot to invest in providing the information that that Canadians are asking, not what the government wants to give. You know, like there's a difference between providing information that nobody wants to read about. We need to find out what Canadians want. And institutions know that. They have the frequent requesters. They have those requests that comes back. Briefing notes is a good example. Now that we're providing titles, they are asking for the content. So when you write a briefing note, I told deputy ministers, make sure you know what you want to provide, what's public, what's not public, so that it's easier for your ATIP unit to process after.
I only have 10 seconds left, but do you have any recommendations on how to improve statistical reporting?
Yes, the Scotland government has in their act, the commissioner has access to the statistics every 3 months, so he could proactively go to the units that are struggling. Right now, I think the annual report that is presented by the institutions are useless because we see the results a year later. So it's not helpful for my office. It's not helpful for anybody. I think we need to reduce the reporting requirement to what really is useful to us. Like, how many requests? I mean, how often are you late? How many unit analysts do you have? And what's your issues? You know, so we can actually help them.
Ms. Hepner and Ms. Menard. We're going to go to Mr. Dalton. This is the final round of questioning, so Mr. Dalton, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. And it's the first time I've heard from you in person, but it is can sense the frustration, exasperation that you feel as you're reporting, and this seems to be a trend that I'm hearing, I've heard on this side, as far as I think of the parliamentary budget officer, just feel like they're being starved for funds, not able to do their job, not able to investigate, and it feels like they're being stymied and blocked in every respect. We heard from the ethics commissioner who's now resigned, just basically it seemed like out of frustration, because he said that the government, the Liberal government, just does not seem to be taking ethics seriously. And it's like, what's the use? And it's like, I'm getting that sense also that from your comments. And he said that public shaming is the foundation of the system as far as ethics, and that's not working when you have constant breaches by the Prime Minister, by others, and it's just ongoing and ongoing. And so I'm just wondering, he talked about public shaming, the ethics commissioner, what hammer, if you want to call it a hammer, what do you have to do to help enforce just your policies and as far as the freedom of information? Do you have any tools, or is it just basically bringing it up and complaining and it's like you're being ignored?
Well, I have to say, until 2019, my office could only make recommendations, and that was the biggest, I think, issue with the system. Because for years, complaints resulted in simply a recommendation and the institution could ignore it unless my office would take them to court. Now we are issuing orders, and if they don't agree with the orders, they have to take it to court. What I see, however, is sometimes they don't say they don't agree with it, and they don't do it. And that I don't have the authority to make sure that they comply with the order. So imagine they don't comply with the act, but they don't comply with the order as well. So this is something that I think this committee needs to look at, providing a process by which the orders can be certified in court, and that then you can go to the institutions with this order. And it's something that is now in the bill for the Official Languages Act that are changing the Commissioner of Official Languages Authority. They actually did a certification provision in there, and I think the Privacy Commissioner as well. So it exists. It's something that is there. I asked for it for Bill C-58. I was not giving to me, but we do have the orders, and we publish those, so that is something also that is very helpful.
Great. You commented that transparency is just not a priority for this government, and I guess that's in the light of what's been coming out in the past number of days, weeks, with the Beijing Communist government, with undermining our democracy, and now we have a rapporteur a repertoire being brought forward, and it just seems to me to be just reinforcing what you're saying as far as transparency. That's our concern, that they're not interested in transparency and facts being brought out. It's coming across with what we're seeing here in this very serious undermining of our democracy. So, question, you mentioned about 4,000 files being brought forward that you're able to deal with. Is that complaints, or is it, like, for example, I received an email today from a constituent who had sent an ATIP in 8 months ago, and it's still not, there's been no response. And so how would that be one of the 4,000? How do you come up with the number?
So, yeah, your constituent would have to make a complaint to my office for me to investigate why after 8 months he's not receiving or she's not receiving a request. That would be one of the complaints that I'm dealing with, yeah.
Okay, and just going to Mr. Bain's point about the number of files, of requests, I know also being from British Columbia, we found that, for example, one person did like 1/3, hundreds of ATIPs. So I'm just wondering if perhaps, okay, maybe the first 2 or 3 is free, but afterwards maybe a little charge.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. We're going to go to Ms. Khalid for 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Maynard, for being here today. I appreciate it. Just wanted to clarify, I know that as much as Mr. Dalton loves to be dramatic, the Ethics Commissioner, I believe, did resign or retire for health issues, not out of frustration. And I think that really gets to the crux of what we're doing here, and that's to make sure that we're sorry, Mr. Dalton, I did not interrupt you when you were speaking. Let's not go down that path.
Stop your time. So let's stop the interaction across the way. We've got Ms. Khalid who has the floor. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Maynard, I understand. So you spoke a little bit about the difference. So you came in 2018, and you said that you were at a point where you could only make recommendations, and now you make orders. Can you just help define what the difference is there, and how you got to that point?
Well, the change was made through the Bill C-58 in 2019. So the Commissioner's authority was to issue recommendations to institutions, and now it has been changed to, I can make recommendations, but I can also order disclosure or order that a certain time for disclosure be done. The change is tremendous because when we only make recommendation, our office felt that it had to negotiate. For long times there was a lot of negotiating with institutions because we were worried that the requester would not get what he or she was asking, and we realized that it created long delays, and we didn't have that power, to really work with the institution and make it happen. Now with the order, we don't negotiate anymore. We ask for representations. We ask for why they're late or why an exemption has been applied. And if we don't agree, we agree to disagree, and the order is issued. So now the institution has to respond to the order. It's a lot more quick and it's a lot more efficient.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So just given your experience, do you think that your department and overall government has been going more towards transparency or away from transparency in these past 7 years?
It's difficult to tell because we are seeing more and more access requests, more and more delays, and there's definitely a lot of information being provided, but there's a lot more complaints to my office as well. So Canadians are asking for more information, and until we, like I said earlier, we do more disclosure proactively, change portals that information is provided without having to go through the access, Canadians are not going to stop asking the questions. They want to know.
And that's a good thing in my opinion, and I'm really glad that we are presenting an opportunity or at least a platform for Canadians to be able to ask those questions. What is your wish position? I know you've seen the report from the minister. You yourself have provided submissions. Ultimately, what is your wish position when it comes to statistics reporting or Indigenous issues or HR issues in your office? What do you think is where you want to be within your work?
My submission speaks for themselves, but what I think is very important is for this committee's report to come up with recommendations. And I know that the Act provides for a parliamentary review of the legislation. I think this is something that needs to be taken on, and the Act should be reviewed, and there should be an actual report made on each of those sections in the Act. Public interest needs to be added to the Act. Like, there's a lot of things in my report that I think needs to be considered, and you've heard from experts in the field. They all have really good recommendations as well. I think this is your role now to provide a report to this government with respect to changes that will affect this system.
And just speaking on the system, what are some, I guess, steps or processes that you, within your capacity, take to address some of those systemic challenges that you face on a regular basis?
Well, one of the things that we've done and we realize has a very positive impact is publishing our reports, because then we can refer Canadians or institutions to the way that we interpret the Act, and sometimes it helps us resolve issues quicker. And I'm hoping that our analysts out there and institutions are actually reviewing our website so that it can help them making those decisions as well when they actually receive a request, not wait until the complaint is made.
I appreciate that. Now, how often do you think that ATIP officials should be producing such reports? You're a big proponent on transparency and engagement with the Canadian public. Does your office have the resources to be able to provide, say, like a quarterly report, as opposed to, I guess you were saying, a report that's published 2 years after the fact?
The annual report on ATIP I think is the problem, and I think it needs to be changed into something that's very easy to enter into a database, no reporting necessary.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. La prochaine intervention.
Next, Mr. Villemur, you have 2.5 minutes. In the report by Treasury Board, what are the recommendations, or what's missing, rather? What would you have liked to see in that report? What I was saying earlier is that the report gives us a good description of all the issues and some solutions, but no recommendations on how to solve these issues, and there's no information on the government's plan. You don't have the funding either. Indeed, we'll have to examine costs, but that comes with any action plan. Currently, the report gives us, as you say, a great description of where the system's at currently. And in your opinion, the first 3 things to do, if we could only do 3 things, what would they be? Declassification program. I think that would be easy to implement and is absolutely necessary for the government. We need to examine the Act and the different sections of the Act and give recommendations. You are the legislators. You will be able to make a difference. I can see what's not working, and I put it in my report, and you heard as well from people who use the Act and who have told you how it works. So I think that would be another step, and then to have a system that will help our analysts and our access to information units to be able to manage information, help them staff. So declassification, reviewing the Act, and more funding, or more resources. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. We're going to try this again. You had spoken about the comparing your department through the whole of government. Can you compare what staffing looks like within an access regime currently and what it would ideally look like to complete requests within a reasonable amount of time?
Well, like anything, like the staffing in government is a complex and long and bureaucratic. You know, you have a lot of steps, which is fine. I think what we need is pools, and we have to keep those pools filled with candidates that are qualified, interested, and so that it's easy for all the institutions to go into that pool to access staffing.
That seems very reasonable. You described a situation where the author of an access request is told that there's no records regarding a specific action or decision made by an institution. I think this is pretty problematic. Are there any particular institutions that report that they don't have records regarding an action or a decision more than others?
No, and we see that often in terms of missing, what we call it as missing records.
Mm-hmm.
So usually the requesters will have evidence that there should be records or that a decision was made or there's more to it. And we do find often it's just because the unit was not tasked properly. You know,
but there's no department that is more problematic in its instance than others?
I can't tell you that I've seen it in more than one than another.
That's fair. And I think that an important question around public interest. Can you describe the impact of the Access to Information Act not including a general public interest provision?
It goes with the culture of secrecy. You know, if it's out there in the introduction that public interest is important. Right now, it's only a factor in terms of discretionary decisions. It's proper and it's good to have it as a factor. But if it's there in the introduction, it means that it overrides. You know, it adds to the value of access.
Thank you. Are you aware of any examples of the 6 provinces where institutions are required to disclose information about a risk of significant harm to the health and safety of the public or the environment, and where such information is disclosed?
I know Ontario has it, and I'm sure, like you said, there's more. But I remember hearing about Ontario providing having that specific provision.
Yeah, I'll just note that we had an opportunity to actually expand our whistleblower protections and have some more of this available, and unfortunately didn't have the full support of the House. Thank you.
Mr. Keurig, you are up for 5 minutes.
That was a block.
Thank you very much, and it's been very, very enlightening as we've heard a host of, and I think a fair amount of agreement on the need for more action. Commissioner, I'd ask for your observation. You're in the unique position to see where the problems are. And is there any observations that you could share with the committee about the most problematic departments, any trends that you see within those departments? Is there information that you could offer to the committee on that, and then possibly some solutions that we could bring forward in terms of recommendations to the government?
What we see is, and I provided you in my document, the institutions that we're receiving the most complaints about, but it's not always because they receive the most complaints that they're the worst. It's just often it's percentage of the amount of requests that they're receiving. What we see across the board is Section 21 is being overused and abused. Section 21 is the section that allows you to redact advice and recommendations made by a department official. And it's not well described. The exemptions is very broadly written, and so it's often used to redact information that is not advice and recommendations, and that's definitely a problem across the government. And in my submission, I made some specific recommendations to rewrite that exemptions because, for example, in Ontario, they have a very good list of things that it should not include, and that would be very helpful, I think, for this.
So if I could ask just somewhat of a different direction on that, including the MOs and the PMO in the access to information regime. Just want to give you the opportunity in hopefully 45 seconds or so, and then I'd like to ask you a question in a different direction. Could you provide just a little bit more context as to how you could see that working and ensuring that there's that accountability that Canadians expect?
I think it's just a question of there's a lot of decisions that this government is making that are being discussed in cabinet minister's office and in the prime minister's office. And when we see documents that have been gone to these offices, it's all redacted. And it's also like you have to determine where's the cutoff. You know, when does it become the bureaucrats versus the government? So I think having a transparent government means everybody who's elected, everybody's going through, you know, that makes decisions on behalf of the government, including ministers' offices, should be subjected to the act so that our Canadians are confident that they're getting all the information they're entitled to.
No, I appreciate that, and certainly in my experience with the ATIP system, it's been incredibly frustrating, even when MPs have been promised information and then having to go through the ATIP system as a last resort, and then not being able to get the information that in some cases we saw during a briefing or whatever the case. I can tell you an incredible amount of frustration. So I want to change gears with the last minute and a half I have or so. Technology. You mentioned the Act is 40 years old. There's been a massive amount of technological development, both in terms of communications, the way the decisions are made. I'd like to give you, in about a minute, if you could summarize or make some recommendations about how this committee could make the path forward for ensuring that not only technology is a part of addressing the challenges that technology has brought to the access to information regime, but if you have some recommendations as to possibly how technology could be part of the solution to ensure that there is a greater level of accountability within government.
There is definitely a need to be investment in technology. We are in 2023, and this government is lacking in terms of using artificial intelligence. You know, RRCC actually is using bots, like robots, to identify some information. It's making great progress, and it actually had great results. I think the other problem in government is everybody's working in silos. When I want to increase my capacity in my office for infrastructure, I have to hire my own consultants and spend my own money, where the next institution is doing the same thing. So I think a platform where everybody could, you know, use all this technology and share the information that they're. And I think Treasury Board is having great projects and stuff, but we need to see it more. We need to see that exchange of information. RCC is definitely on the right path, but we haven't seen the results yet.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pierre. Ms. Khalid, final round, 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. Ms. Maynard, in your previous testimony, you mentioned that a way to improve government documentation would be to delete emails with no corporate value and simply record meeting minutes on memos to eliminate the need to retain specific email chains. The report appears to agree with you on the need to improve that documentation. Do you believe that making this change would reduce that workload?
Definitely. You have no idea how many requests that we see that have hundreds of the same email and hundreds of the same pages, and that the analysts have no choice to process and treat. We are getting more and more access requests that results in thousands of pages. But it used to be not very often, and the elimination of fees definitely has had an issue and a big impact on that. But that's not the only thing. The lack of management information is definitely key, and we need to better manage so that the Canadians, the requesters, are getting what they want, not 25 times the same thing.
I hear that. I hate email chains myself, to be honest. Just on a different note, now the report concludes that implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples requires changing the definition of what is an Aboriginal government. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
I do. Right now, I think there's only 13 nations that are subset part of that definition, and I've heard from them that it is definitely an issue, and I think it's great that they've been consulted to this round of for the review, and I'm hoping that their concerns will be addressed.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on the recommendations identified in the report on advancing Indigenous reconciliation? You know, we talk about whole of government. In my opinion, this is literally what it looks like, department by department by department, to ensure Just your honest take on how that's addressed in the report.
I will be honest with you. I think this is a subject that is so in itself important, and I would let the experts deal with that, because I think the Indigenous people should be talking to you of whether or not the report is going far enough in their view. They've been consulted, but whether or not the report has made recommendations that will respond to their concern. They have very specific concerns, and I think that it's really worth listening to them.
And have you met with them? Have you received their consultations yourself? And do you have anything to share with that respect?
No, I'm not part of the consultation process, but I have met with them in terms of how I can help them and how my office is dealing with complaints from their offices and their group.
And do you have one issue to share that is the biggest concern?
Their biggest concerns is timelines. Again, delays in getting information. For them, it's key. They have to have this information to pursue their requests. So they need information to be provided to them informally. They shouldn't have to ask information through an access request. Same.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maynard. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. I'm going to take a few minutes. I do have a couple of questions and a comment as well. You mentioned in earlier comments, Ms. Maynard, that Canada is lagging behind legislation 40 years. Can you give the committee an example of the gold standard in relation to perhaps some other countries as it relates to access to information?
Well, there is a link I can send you with how the statutes in the different countries are being evaluated. And I think Afghanistan is first, interestingly enough. And Mexico.
Say that again.
Afghanistan.
Okay.
Yeah. The act. So there's a difference between the legislation that is great, but then we need also to properly apply the legislation and to process access. What I'm telling you, what the norms are, it should be free. Everybody in government should be subjected to the act. There should be also, like I said earlier, the providers of services on behalf of the government, they should be subjected to the act. Better, the scope of the act has to be reviewed. The public interest needs to be included. Proactive disclosure should be increased, and there should be an authority to evaluate what's being provided on the proactive disclosure list. Right now, there is nobody really looking at if people are actually meeting their obligations. I don't have the authority, and I definitely don't have the resources to do it now. But it's something, all these are definitely making our act falling behind with respect to the norms.
Well, if anything, the report that was submitted to Parliament by the Treasury Board President did was give air under the wings of this committee to come up with some substantive recommendations, because one of the things that you did say that it was a good summary of the problems, but there were no solutions to the problems. In my view, a lot of what was recommended was actually punted down the line, and it's not going to solve anything. So that really sort of creates a level of importance for this committee to be able to provide recommendations to the government. Now, we can table the report. Whether they do anything about it or not is up to them. But we are planning on having the President of the Treasury Board come to explain the submissions that she made to Parliament. So I think that would be helpful as well. Do you agree?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, that's it. I appreciate you coming in and providing us with the information today, Ms. Maynard. It was very, very helpful. Thank you to the committee members, the analysts, and the clerk. On behalf of the committee and Canadians, I want to say thank you again, Ms. Maynard. We're going to suspend for a few minutes, and then we're going to come back in camera to deal with some committee business. Thank you.